or just you on her thing. And I'm fine. No.
And that's what I tried to tell people. That's your freaking right.
Yeah.
If you want to,
It's
go
not gonna
ahead.
come from here, sorry.
I'm not going to take a gun and go.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So it makes it interesting.
Right.
Welcome to the reopening of the recessed public hearing. Today is August 31st. The time is 6 p.m. All commissioners are present as the Drainage Authority, along with our Auditor Treasurer, our Coordinator, Nancy Eulenkamp, our Ditch Inspector, and Kurt Dieters, our Ditch Attorney. If we will stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. To start with, the bathrooms are located, if you go out to the windows and then take a left, they're that direction. And if you have a cell phone on, if you please silence it or turn it off. With that, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll move the agenda, Madam Chair.
Motion by Newman. Is there a second? By Kneisel. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Carries. With that, Kurt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As indicated, my name is Kurt Dieter. I provide legal counsel to the county board, who tonight is sitting as the drainage authority for County Ditch 41. You're the drainage authority for ditches in Todd County. Tonight, we're specifically talking about Todd County 41. I'll also be acting as moderator based on the board's approval that I act as moderator to if particular issues come up. I want to first spend a couple minutes talking about past and how we got to this point. As the board knows, you received a petition for an outlet under Minnesota Statutes 103E.401 into the Ditch 41 system. That is a section of the statute that allows for such a petition, and I will be reading a couple sentences at the conclusion of this as to what that statute indicates. As the board will recall, the last hearing we went about 2.5, 3 hours and got to be a little bit later in the evening, and we decided two things. One, to continue the hearing, recess it and continue it to a later date, and secondly, to retain an outside consulting engineer to look at the issue of capacity and the operation and maintenance plan. And the representatives of Bolton and Mink are here tonight to give that testimony and go through their report. As you look at the agenda, you'll see that there's some things we just have to make a record of, that we gave the proper notice requirements. And then I will be going through a list of the documents that have been received since the last meeting that are part of the record. We won't be reading each one, but if somebody wants theirs to read into the record, we will certainly do that. But I want to indicate that the board has been made aware and provided copies of those documents, and so they are part of the record and will be and have been reviewed by the board. Because so many people at the last hearing sat for 2.5, 3 hours, and we started taking public testimony, we did not want to start again tonight with the technical information and not allow those people to continue with their public testimony. So although it may end up being a little bit out of order, we thought it was important, the board thought it was important, that the people that have sat through this testimony be able to be on the agenda and make those comments, any comments that they have. At the conclusion of that, we'll have the report of your consulting engineer, Mr. Helgett, and Sean Luker, and go through their reports. The petitioner's engineer and attorney may have comments concerning the consulting engineer's report, and then we'll open it back up for public comment, limited to the reports, not to rehash everything that may have been said earlier in the evening. My goal, and I'm not sure, but I think it's the board's goal, that time permitting, that we get the public testimony all in tonight, so that that we'll be able to close the public input and bring it back to the board for some things under item 10 there you see that I'll be talking about a little bit later. One thing I should say is those of us with mics are going to be speaking sitting down here, but as people testify, there's a podium over there with a mic that we need to have it on the record so that people can identify themselves, so that we have a record, their name and possibly their address. The one thing I want to talk about, and I said about the statute, and the board is aware of this, is that the statute's very clear under subdivision 4 of what's to be considered at the hearing, and I'll just read it. I'm not paraphrasing, I'm just going to tell you what the law says. It says, at the hearing, the drainage authority shall consider the capacity of the outlet drainage system. If express authority is given to use the drainage system as an outlet, the drainage authority shall state by order the terms and conditions for use of the established drainage system as an outlet, and shall set the amount to be paid as an outlet fee. The reason I point that out is all testimony is important, all evidence is important, but, and I hesitate to say this, but I think people need to be aware what your jurisdiction is. Your jurisdiction is you've received a petition under 401 and you respond to that petition. I nor you have the ability to say, we don't like that project, go do a different project. That's between the petitioners, that's a different entity than this board. This board, a particular project's come in front of you and we need to address it under the statute. So that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to limit any testimony, but I'd be informing you at the end that if you said, well, go do a different project, that's not under our, and I'm including myself, that's not under our jurisdiction. Or if something happened at a meeting 5 years ago that maybe wasn't as transparent, whatever it is, I don't want to belabor this, but that again is not what you make your decision based on. Your decision will be made on the law, which it always is when you're county commissioners. So with that, I think we'll, before I make a record of the written material, I think with the chairperson's permission, we'll have Nancy just make a record of the notice requirements.
Okay, so for the public notice, a notice was run in the newspapers, the 5 newspapers of the county, run the weeks of August 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd. And then on August 13th, I sent out 103 letters. 14 of those parcels that got letters were outside of the benefited area. And the public notice was posted on the county website and on the boardroom bulletin board.
Madam Chair, I believe that meets the requirements of the statute for notice requirements.
Okay.
Then if we look at the agenda, and interrupt me if I'm just going to go down the agenda, but if the board, you're the one in charge of the hearing, but I will just go through and list what has been received. I believe you have a sheet of listing of what's been received since the last hearing, and I just want to make a record of that. And again, the characterization, whether they're for or against, that's our characterization. The letters speak for themselves, but it was a way to try and put them in some kind of order. What's included in the record now, and this is listed under letters against Mary Jane, and I apologize if I mispronounce names, Mary Jane Devon Candleberry from Lake Chaminade, a letter from Paul Cantleberry from Lake Chaminade, Chris Renkel from Lake Chaminade, Jan Renkel from Lake Chaminade, Jill Kylander from Lake Chaminade, Jesse Kylander from Lake Chaminade, Richard and Maureen Anderson, Lake Chaminade, Herb Bloomquist, Lake Chaminade, Geraldine Schmitz, Lake Chaminade, and again, our characterization letters in support. Again, the letters speak for themselves, whatever the board believes they say. Gerald and Donna Sobiek, County Ditch 41 landowner. Larry and Peggy Benson, County Ditch 41 landowner. Samantha and Ryan Rodens, County Ditch 41 landowner. Sean and Karen Weller, County Ditch 41 landowner. Dennis Hansen and Robin Stoltz, County Ditch 41 landowner. And then we received some emails, again characterized as against. Chuck Ross, from Lake Chaminade. Mark Frisk from Lake Chaminade. Larry and Lois Johnson, Lake Chaminade. Emails in support, Mark Murphy from Lake Chaminade. Then some miscellaneous but important documents. There's the report from Bolton and Mink. There's a document from Rick Roser, which is an email regarding Bruce Senta's question. There's a lid letter dated August 27th to the Ditch Authority. There's a lid answer to SWCD questions. There's a lid response to Bolton and Mink recommendations. There's a lid outlet fee research and recommendations. There's a lid map number 1, landowner support along main ditch. There's a lid map number 2, landowner support along main ditch. And then there's an updated operating plan from the lid and their engineering consultants that we're characterizing as report version number 6. So those are the written documents that we've received. And Nancy's done an excellent job of keeping record of those, and I believe all of those have been provided to the board. So with that, Madam Chair, I would suggest then we would go continue it in the public comment. Again, I think it's the right thing to do where people waited for 2 or 3 hours to be able to get up and make their comments now.
Madam Chair, if I could ask a question
Yes.
of Kurt. In the letters against and the letters in support, and this might be a trivial question, but in the letters against, well, I don't assume, I think the addresses are the same. It's husband and wife, husband and wife, husband and wife, I believe, and then when we do letters of support, we put them in one, but when we do letters against, we put them in separate. So how is that judged?
I can answer that. That's
Okay.
because we got 2 different letters.
Yes.
The ones that are together,
Yes.
they were on the same,
Paper.
Okay, but if you're counting numbers,
No, don't count
okay,
numbers.
that's what I wanted to clarify. so-
Absolutely, it's not a numbers decision.
Well, I mean, just for comparisons in
Right.
my mind,
Right.
I want to make the clarification for
That's
record.
a good question. I think Nancy did it based on a document. If it was one document, it was listed that way. If it was
Okay.
2 documents, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So, Madam Chair, in my opinion, we should open it up for public comment, kind of a continuation of that last hearing if people didn't get a chance. Again, the board is well aware of what was commented on last time. We'll be here as long as it takes, but it's not a new hearing to start all over again. It's give an opportunity for those people that didn't get to talk last time.
And we would like to start with the person that we cut off at the last meeting.
Okay, you even know who that is, so they're good.
Coming up.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, board members, and ditch inspector. I get really nervous when I do this, so please.
Ma'am, could you state your name again?
I will.
apologize.
I will. My name is Maureen Anderson. My address is 4542 Canterbury Road. I do not live on Chaminade, and I'm not a LID member. But I would like to say the paid administrator of the LID board stated in a meeting on August 5th that because of the remaining problem water and its effects, the LID board does want Todd County to approve this petition. Then she said perhaps we perhaps not speak out against the LID's project at the public hearing. Others have been personally cautioned and requested not to speak. I and others take offense at any attempt to hinder our right to speak. We have the right to speak. We have the right to our own opinions. Additionally, I refuse to cower down to some of the bullying and threatening things that have been posted on Facebook and said personally. I'm not opposed to the LID, its intended functions, or certainly a sensible project to help ensure reasonable water level for Chaminade. However, compassion and sentiment for some should not govern the rights of the many to care for and protect what's theirs. Personally, my extended family lost their home. My kids lost their home, a full-time residence to the lake's high water last year, beginning March 23rd of 2020. The water crested an earthen berm, and the main living area of their home literally filled with water. By the next day, on March 24th, they had between 3 and 4 feet of water, not inches, feet. Moving forward to Chaminade's current status, as of today, I talked with Mr. Al Dory. He's the official record gatherer of the rainfall and the levels of the lake. Our rain from March through August has been 12 3/8 inches, including what just fell recently. The current lake reading is it's done in hundreds. It's 1.34 feet, or 1 foot 4 inches over ordinary high water. Last year, when the biggest amount of flooding occurred, it was 3 feet over the ordinary high water. So the lake level today is officially down 1.8 or 1 foot 8 inches from that high level. You're going to find different people have different numbers that it's come down, because that number was taken on 5/26, that 3 foot measure. People had the water was higher than that prior to that. This positive dramatic change is due in part to the drought, which may or may not continue. Contributing to that positive change also are the efforts of the Chaminade Emergency Task Force. They have been collaboratively working on correcting problematic drainage, inflow, and watershed area, and that work continues. One could say that the high water in the lake has not been the problem, but merely a tragic symptom of the disordered inflow and the watershed issues compounded by the wet hydrologic cycle. Because of the receding water, for whatever reason, and the pause it's provided, it would seem to be sensible to take time to reevaluate the LIDS project trajectory. It would be a shame, I believe, to further disrupt nature's balance by introducing a drastic mechanical enforcement without first allowing the restoration work of the watershed and the time that it needs to work properly. I have a couple questions. Has the Ditch Authority taken any kind of a poll or a vote of your constituents about how they feel about the problem water?
I will answer that for the board, no.
Okay. Would you consider doing that as part of your decision-making process?
Well, that's a board decision, but it would not follow the statute. The statute sets out the criteria. It is not an election, in my opinion. The board can do whatever they want, but that's not the criteria laid out in the statute.
Even if it wasn't an election, just an opinion poll? Just asking.
It'd be a board decision, but again, I would be telling the board that doesn't weigh into your decision. This decision is based on the statute.
Okay. Jumping to another level then of public input, something that was mentioned was the LIDS Voluntary Environmental Assessment Worksheet, or EAW. And I'd just like to say to all the Todd County residents, I can't stress enough, please take the step to this next level of discretion and participate in the enlightening EAW process. The EAW could also trigger an environmental impact statement, or an EIS, would need to be completed. If you want specific answers to your complex questions about how Chaminade's problem water may inadvertently impact Ditch 41, the EIS could be the tool necessary to determine that. Then I have a couple questions regarding the ditch viewing process. Has this process ever been implemented for the Todd County ditch projects in the past?
I
True
can't
for
speak.
Nancy.
I can't speak specifically for Todd County. The process under 401 is a two-step process. First, whether authority for the outlet is granted, and then secondly, determining an outlet fee. I can't specifically say Todd County. It's been implemented many times around the state in many counties that I've been involved in.
Okay. It seems like that would be really intensive work. I guess what I was wondering was how long would the board or the ditch inspector think that that process would take for the viewing for this kind of a magnitude of a project?
Again, I can't speak for let's say the board decided to get a viewer's input. Again, the board makes the final decision, but I don't think it would be a very long process. The ones I've been familiar with, the very experienced viewers could give a fairly reasonably timed opinion as to what they believe an outlet fee should be. So.
Okay. Then, according to the recording of your work planning meeting on 2021, around minute 37, the question was asked, and I'm quoting this conversation, "When was the last time this ditch was maintained?" And the response was never. Then that could be a bit of an issue, and yes, or yeah. That could be a way to get the ditch cleaned out. That may be a condition that the outlet fee be used to clean the system so you have more of a comfort level that the system is flowing a little better than it does. It can be a win-win. I'd just like to say respectfully, ma'am and sirs, this is honestly a push point for some on the paying end of the equation. While some may see this as a win-win, some see a win-pay on a 100-year maintenance project. Moving forward, hypothetically speaking, if you allow this petition and the project moves forward, have you thought about how the LID members would have a true voice with you? Would it be only through the LID board, or would the members have a direct access to your board? In other words, would the Chaminade folks be able to directly call the ditch authority or the ditch inspector and have conversations about what the ditch is doing or whatever?
I will try and answer that. Yes, anybody can call Nancy and ask questions and get input. It would not be limited to anybody in particular, me or a LID, or it's a public office that is in charge of the drainage systems, and every landowner has the right to ask Nancy or anybody else on county staff questions.
So if I understand a document that someone shared with me, there, through the process so far, the Chaminade LID has been paying a portion of the ditch inspector's time that she spent, the wages she spent.
Yes, one of the conditions in accepting this petition, because the system knew it was going to incur expenses, would be that the petitioners would cover those expenses, regardless of what the decision is, because I believe there's a belief both by the board and myself that the people on Ditch 41 should not be paying for this hearing process. So the petitioners agreed to do that, which is fairly common on outlet proceedings.
That I can understand that, and I don't disagree at all. Would that process then continue should you allow this petition? Would the Chaminade folks be continuing to pay for part of the ditch authority or the ditch inspector's time.
And I'm speaking without board authorizing me, so correct me, only if it was specifically on, if an outlet's granted, only specifically if it was regards to this project. The outlet fee could be used to cover those expenses. Again, I'm hypothetically saying what might happen. But if it was purely just removing beaver dams on ditch 41, that would be a normal process anyway. That would be like a normal ditch process where it's against the landowners.
That's understandable. Do you think, what would you think would be the process if you should have to do some extensive maintenance on the ditch and say change the flow or widen or narrow a certain area or put in a new culvert? Would you have to, once that project is in place, would you have to also include the 300 Chaminade residents in the notification and the consideration process?
If ditch 41 is repaired, it can only be repaired to as constructed. So the board would not, without an improvement petition, would not be able to widen or deepen ditch 41. It can only be maintained to its original construction. And no, as part of this project process, we're doing an outlet fee, which is like a use fee. We are not bringing the Chaminade land into the benefited area. So if there's a repair on ditch 41, that will not be assessed against Lake Chaminade. Maybe taking out of their outlet fee, but it won't be a special assessment against them.
Okay. Now I'm going to address something that's kind of tough for me. So I want you to think about it for a minute. Hypothetically speaking, is it possible that there could be several reasons that Morrison County is willing to hand over the $200,000 as an incentive? In 2018 and into 19, Morrison County was spending an excessive amount of labor hours on many levels in Chaminade's issues. The county leaders publicly discussed this dilemma and proposed charging the Chaminade LID members a substantial additional service fee over and above their LID assessment. After much discussion, this didn't happen. Right now, that $200,000 looks like a lot of money. Carefully consider the perpetual weight of duty and responsibility you'll be accepting and passing on to your successors, should you decide yes on this petition. Since I've addressed the carrot and the elephant in the room regarding the $200,000, according to that same June 21st meeting, when I asked if the Ditch Authority could discuss the topic of the money, your attorney advised no. The discussion continued. This can be found on the recording of that meeting around minute 31. During the discussion, there was talk of how your board would be able to use these funds totally at your discretion. In the discussion, these comments were made. Forget the petitioners, and I have other thoughts on the use of that money. Then there was another comment that was, we've had a little discussion about it. As I understood the instruction of your attorney in that meeting, the board is supposed to be making the decision regarding this petition based on the evidence presented at the hearing or what's on the record. It would seem that the comments made at that meeting, you might be leaning heavily toward saying yes to this petition. It's just my own opinion, and I wanted to state it. Summing up what I have to say, in my opinion, with the drought in our favor, the correction of inflow and watershed problems, and the continuing of that work, it would be wise if the LID board would take this time to consider more reasonable solutions. Those solutions could prove to be more prudent financially and carry significantly less environmental intrusion and footprint. In other words, Todd County may not be the only option for water removal. Number 2, the potential for enduring environmental consequences for Todd County may prove to be devastating to your ditch system, the laterals, and the many citizens whose property it would impact. Number 3, the long-term perpetual commitment of Todd County personnel and environmental resources are really incalculable. As I stated before, compassion and sentiment for some should not govern the rights of the many to care for and protect what's theirs. My own heart has been broken over the devastation of the high water. My family has suffered, and their full-time home is gone because of it. It's a total loss. I shouldn't say it's gone. It's a total loss. Unfortunately, that's one of the risks you take when you buy land and property around a lake. As much as I don't like the flooding and the horrible effects, I still firmly believe what I told you when I was here before. I still firmly believe we should never make our problem water Todd County's or anyone else's problem. Thank you for your time. And do you have any questions for me?
Commissioners? Thank you. Thank
I
you very much.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Mark Murphy, and we have property on Shamano Lake, 3024 Pine View Boulevard. My wife Jan and I have owned a family cabin on the south side of the lake for the last 27 years. It is not our permanent home, but it is our family cabin. So thank you tonight. I want to thank you tonight for the time that you've all taken to hear this issue and to process it. It's taken a lot of your time, and I know that energy and effort is hard sometimes. So we appreciate you taking time to listen to our major issue that we have regarding the devastating high water that is occurring on the lake. This devastation goes into cabins and houses underwater. That's bad enough, but it affects everybody on the lake when that cabin rots and sits there and leaches into the water. The septic tanks obviously are leaching into the water. Again, that owner has some responsibility, but until we get this solved, it's going to get continued. Shoreline erosion and loss of century-old trees are beginning to fall. And it's really a sad deal. So it's not those people that are losing, it's everybody around the lake that's losing, and it's everybody that puts a foot into the lake that's losing if we don't get this resolved. I know that you've received communication, and I've heard from a few on or around the lake that have indicated they do not support the plan. When I looked at your list up there, there are quite a few numbers of people that sent you memos or letters, and there are some that sent in support. We did not start a letter writing campaign. We are here to talk about this in person and to talk about the statistics of the support of the people around the lake. So the people that have voiced opinions against it are not in the majority. They are not the majority owners, whether they've given you more letters or not. They are not the majority, and they do not speak for the majority of the people around the lake. Just in case you haven't heard the statistic, a year ago, our people that were around the lake, the people that are members of the LID, had an opportunity to vote whether they wanted to progress a plan to Todd County and a plan in general to begin this pumping project. A supermajority, 74% or more than 74% of the people said, yes, we support doing something about this high water. It is a problem, it's devastating our lake, and it's something that we need as owners to be stewards of this lake and take care of. Understand the drought has dropped the water a little bit, and has dropped it almost in half. But as we saw over the weekend, rains can happen fast, and as we saw in different parts of the state, 5 and 6 inches rains are not uncommon in our world today. They might have been 20 years ago, but they're not uncommon today. So we cannot be complacent and assume that that is going to resolve our issue. So with that 74% majority, I hope, and I really ask that we can take the question of whether owners are in support of this project off the table. They've spoken. It's an official ballot count. It's on record in the LID as a government agency. And so we do have the support of our owners on a majority, supermajority, to do this project. So what's left then after we take that off the table? Well, I believe we have one important question that we should be addressing now. And that is, will Ditch 41 have the capacity to handle the water that would come from this project? And that is something that our engineers are going to have to tell us, and we're going to have to rely upon somebody to help us understand that. So as I heard the Houston engineering report, and I assume that your engineer will tell us the same thing, that Ditch 41 has the capacity as long as there is a controlled operating plan. So, meaning it can pump sometimes and it can't pump other times. And we appreciate that and we respect that as people that are residing on Shamana Lake. So the pumping operating plan for the outlet will control when we can turn on the pump. And there's going to be hard-coded into there, and we will follow that. I think another important point is that once the lake level is initially lowered to the ordinary high water level, and again, the ordinary high water level is the 100-year mark for the high water. And so as you heard not too long ago, months ago, we were 3 feet above that, or more than that, I believe. The future need to operate this pump will probably be far, far less in the years to come. So we anticipate, we believe, or I believe, I shouldn't say we anticipate, I believe that once we get it down to that level, the pump may not run as often as we would think it would at the start of the plan. So in summary, I will say, and this is my opinion, and I think LID's in general, it's not our intent to make our high water a major issue for somebody else downstream. We don't want that any more than any of the landowners want it. We want to be partners in this whole thing, resolving this issue. And I believe with this pumping outlet plan, we can really accomplish this together. And we can resolve the issue and have landowners be comfortable with where things are at with the water coming through their property. I should say also that I respect the people that have a different opinion about this whole thing, but again, the majority of the people have spoken and wish to have this done. So I guess I would stop by saying I encourage you to vote yes on the use of Ditch 41 and to help us save together Lake Shamana for future generations. Anybody have any questions for me?
Madam Chair, I have a couple. Are all property owners member of the LID?
I believe, I'm not the authority on that, but I would say yes, they are. There's a term for that. Riparian owners, so people that own.
That own property
Right.
on the lake itself?
And even some of the association members that aren't directly on the lake are part of that group of people.
Okay.
And those are the people that would have had an opportunity to vote on moving this project forward.
Okay, so that follows into my next question, and you use the words "had an opportunity to vote." How many people were present there that actually voted from the LID?
Sure. I don't know the number. I'd have to turn to some of the folks in the LID, but it wasn't a vote at the day of the meeting. It was something we all got in the mail.
Right.
It was a ballot that came to us, and there was a window of time where we could fill in that ballot and return it to a source of people outside the lid that did the accounting and accounting of that. So I don't know the number. If they can certainly add to that if they know the number. It was probably wasn't 100%, but again, everybody had ample opportunity to address this question if they wish to. So I'm sure, like any other voting process, I'm pretty sure it was not 100%.
I think we heard a number earlier, like around 300 property owners, is that correct?
That is correct, Commissioner. 220, if I recall correctly, voted.
Responded?
In the last election. The number that vote is not actually the same as the number of properties. There's some rules about if you own adjacent parcels, you only get one vote as an example. But if I recall correctly, it's like 285 get to vote and 220 voted, something like that. If you want the exact numbers, I can send it to you.
I was just curious. I had heard it, termed like that, and I never really heard the exact numbers on what was what, so. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, Commissioners?
Well, again, I thank you for your time in working through this process. We really appreciate it.
State your name, then.
Name, John Trantina, 30848 Quicken Road, Browerville, Minnesota. I got property on the ditch 41 in question. My family, we own about 3/4 of a mile along on the ditch, if you would. I've been raised there my whole life. Played in it when I started a year old, We looked over this whole situation, what the engineers have proposed and whatnot, and it looks like a good plan to us. We don't really feel it's going to harm us in any way. It's a little bit of water they're talking about. I watch that creek or ditch, if you want to call it, go up and down day to day, depending on if it's heavy rain, it'll come up. 3 days later, it's back down. Water moves through there fast and quick. And right now, with the drought, it's been, you can walk across with tennis shoes, So that's kind of how it goes, And I don't see really no problem with what they're proposing at all. I've been seeing all the damage around Lake Shamana. Go around there. Used to water ski on it years ago when I was a kid. And we fished there off and on. And it's kind of a sad sight, to be perfectly honest with you. And I feel it's like little water going by is not a big deal to us to help the fellow neighbors out. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, guys.
Madam Chair, Board, good evening. My name is Mark Frisk. I'm a lifelong resident of Lake Shamana area, Motley Township. Grew up on a farm on the Long Prairie River. I'm a property owner on the west side of Lake Shamana. I'm a current board member of the Lake Shamana Association. I'm a member of the Emergency Task Force Committee, which I was a part and instrumental when the LID was formed as a branch off of the Lake Shamana Association. I continue to work with the committees on a daily basis, almost daily for the last 2 years. I became involved with the high water problem on Lake Shamana because of my knowledge of the land in the area, the wetlands, the drainage around Lake Alexander, Fish Trap Lake, and Shamana Lake. I have witnessed the population increase and human alterations in our watershed, which caused the water to flow into Lake Shamana. Previous to 1980, we didn't have an inflow on the southeast of Lake Shamana. I can vouch for that. I shot ducks off the AMA land next to the Ackerman farm when the berm, as we know it, beaver levelers were placed southeast on Lake Shamana. No water flowed over the berm. This happened in 1976. 80 was the last time I stood there and shot ducks. No water over the berm. If you go there today, during the high water, not today, there is no water flowing into Lake Chaminade, but previously, human altercations into our watershed between County Road 203 and number 3 has implicated our watershed so dramatically that the water now flows into Lake Chaminade. Hence the flooding, hence the high water. People will say we do not have an outlet. We have an aquifer, we have a watershed and a wetland. It's quite evident after we cleaned out the blue line ditch south of County Road 203 for 3.5 miles into Todd County. If we hadn't cleaned that ditch out, this spring we would have been, I would guess, another foot higher than we were a year ago. On my frontage alone, I've lost over 24 inches of water since last year, thanks to the efforts of the emergency task force and the clean out of that blue line ditch. We still have some work to do to get the water to flow away from the last 2 square miles of our 6-mile watershed between County Road 203 and number 3. As everyone knows, I've always been opposed to placing a pump in Lake Chaminade. It isn't necessary. When I grew up in the area, the lake came up, the lake went down, the water evacuated out the southeast, that's where our drainage area is, and we didn't have the inflow. 200-acre farms were just that, 200 acres. Now there are 20 owners on the same 200 acres. Human intervention has caused the problem on Lake Chaminade. Until we correct the runoff and the inflow, we're still going to have inflow in some high years. Not as dramatic. You'll never see the water as high as it's been. The reason I got involved is I feel for the people that come up to their weekend cabins and cottages and see the flood. Last year I was on the lake one time. This year I was on the lake one time because it's so devastating to putt around the lake and see the damage that has been done. How do we rectify this? A pump isn't the answer. It's a quick fix. It's a quick answer. Yeah, it might work. Does it need to work? No. We, as a task force, have seen the efforts and the restoration of the wetlands to evacuate water to the west to Fish Trap Creek. I didn't know Ditch 41 existed until this process started. I've always known it as Fish Trap Creek from Fish Trap Lake to the Long Prairie River at Philbrook. I have 4 questions of the Drainage Authority Board. Number 1 is, according to Minnesota State Statute 103E.015, under the heading of consideration before drainage work is done, Subdivision 1 states, before establishment of a drainage project, the Drainage Authority must consider the following criteria. Bullet point 2 in that paragraph says alternative measures. So my question is, would our Lake Chaminade Lid Board be required to look at alternative measures as the dynamics of our wetlands have changed so dramatically since this process was started 2 years ago, and that vote of 74% was taken at an all-time most devastation? By God, get in and get it done. We were going to put a pump in. But I think if you took the vote today, maybe it would change a few minds to, instead of spending $3.5 million, that possibly there's a couple more alternatives that we've been trying to convince our lid board of. Number 2, in Todd County, you have a drainage system management policy. Boy, do you have some updating to do. 2005. On page 15 of your Todd County Drainage Management Policy, it states under 3.08 under Maintenance, Drainage System Repair Fund. It states in your policy that you can have a maximum of $40,000 in your ditch fund. However, there's a disclaimer in your policy that goes on to say the Minnesota state statutes will override your Todd County ditch policy. And in the Minnesota state statutes, it says you got a raise. It says under 103E.735, the maximum you can have in your drainage repair fund is $100,000. Morrison County has dangled a carrot with $200,000 as an incentive for you to complete this petition. My question becomes, how can you have more than $100,000 in your ditch dedicated repair fund for ditch 41? I would like an answer to that. I would also like to let you know that
I'm
Mr.
writing down the question, so if you want me to wait till the end,
Yeah,
I'll
please, please.
All right.
So I've also had many conversations with Mr. Steve Bukowski of Morrison County Engineering. And I said, Steve, we had $200,000 in our emergency task force fund, turn off the faucet projects, et cetera. We're just a group of local, good old farm boys, most of us, doing some common sense, get her done items, culverts, ditch clean outs, talking to landowners, look at the implications, try to help out the property owners. We had $200,000 on a project, and one day it disappears. They said, where'd it go? It's here. Came over to Todd County. That's our tax money. I, for one, wasn't happy with that move. Number 3 out of 4 questions. Future issues may arise on ditch 41. Issues such as erosion, flooding, and even possible water contamination. How will you determine, as a ditch board, where's that contributing water that caused these issues? Where's it coming from? If we're going to introduce water into your ditchway, how are you going to distinguish Lake Chaminade water from Fish Drop Lake water? And what caused the problem? Shall we put red dye in Chaminade water and blue dye in Fish Drop so we know? When we first talked about using ditch 41, I said, well, that's not a problem. Let us use the top half, you guys use the bottom half. We'll make this work. So I'd like to know how the Drainage Authority is going to determine this in the future when implications arise and problems show up, because there will be some. And most of all, question 4, are you worried about the future liabilities due to mechanically induced water versus natural flow water into ditch 41? Nowadays, an attorney will take on anything they can get their hands on. When this process started a month ago on the public hearing, the gentleman is here, Mr. Brian Rappaway. I'd like to remind you of his presentation. Todd County property owner, Mr. Brian Rappaway, at the start of the last month's public hearing, suggested a discharge route in the right-of-way of Highway 10 northward from Lake Chaminade, which would be the shortest route to the Long Prairie River for discharge, all in an enclosed pipe. Guess what? All within Morrison County. Majority of these people could go home if this was implemented. Never any future issues in Todd County with this route. We bring it up to our lid board and they say, oh, we've looked at it. Yeah, they did for about 5 minutes. Oh, it's 50 foot of height to get over Ridge Road. My answer to that is, how the heck do you get water in a water tower? Besides that, we could keep our $200,000 that our taxpayers paid for in Morrison County. We keep that in Morrison County to use on this project. I'd also like to clarify some information that was presented by our LID administrator, Ms. Cindy Kevern, at last month's start of the public hearing. The photos that were shown to you in the PowerPoint presentation were old photos. At the worst of times of the flooding on Lake Chaminade, roads were closed, people were flooded. Yeah, I get it. It was terrible. All the roads are currently open and all the services are available to the residents, including 911 services. The lake level is going down and a reevaluation and more common sense and cost-effective approach must be looked at to correct the watershed of Lake Chaminade. This isn't rocket science. This happened before our eyes, on our watch, kind of snuck up behind us with a few additional wet years. Our discharge got plugged up and our inflow started since 1980. And here we are. Luckily, we've been able to do these projects to alleviate a lot of the water. Most people don't know, I wasn't gonna say this, but most people don't know that if you put a rubber ducky in Lake Chaminade, or excuse me, in Lake Alexander, the little rubber ducky goes under the Long Prairie River Bridge at Motley in about 7, 8 days. I don't know, Hank, when would it go by your house? You know? They think I'm from Motley or something when I say that. I just tell them I am. I've been there my whole life. I've walked most of this land. I've seen the water changes. I've seen the population changes. One other point I'd like to make public, and this has to do with our LID administrator, Miss Cindy Kevern, sitting behind me. As an administrator, I felt very uncomfortable that during a meeting a couple weeks ago with her and a couple other LID members by Zoom, I was personally asked not to speak at this meeting. I take quite offense at that. It's a public hearing, we can say what we want. That's why we live here. Ask yourself as members of the board, why would you, as a ditch authority, enter into petition before you that would bound your county basically forever to further problems, record keeping, monitoring payments, laws, and the ever-continually changing water regulations that we know about, and a host of any other issues that'll rise in future years? We have other options to move water away from Lake Chaminade. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for my opportunity to speak to you. Ms. Eulenkamp also for taking my emails and allowing me to put a face to the letter that I sent to you folks on August 4th, 21. Thank you very much.
Does the board want me to, again, as I've said at the first hearing, I'm not for or against, I just need to address what the law's been quoted as. It's up to the board if you want me to. I think he wanted those questions answered, so
By all
happy to
means,
do
yes,
that.
go ahead.
The first one was whether 015, the environmental considerations before drainage work is done. That refers to, and I'm reading it, drainage project, and drainage project is defined under 005 as a new drainage system, an improvement of a drainage system, an improvement of an outlet or a lateral. None of those are specific legal types of projects. This is not a project as defined under the statute. So 015 does not apply to this situation. Again, I'm not trying to, I'm just saying what the law says. The second question was the repair fund has a limit, but that is a limit based on assessments against ditch 41 landowners for repairs, for the repair fund. An outlet fee is not included in that computation of money in the repair funds. So the third question was about the 200,000, and I'm glad that came up because I think one of the speakers said in the minutes it reflected that your attorney told you that $200,000 has nothing to do with this, and I appreciate the opportunity. 200,000 has nothing to do with your decision. I think that's why at that time I said we're not going to talk about that because that has no bearing whatsoever whether you get it, don't get it. And then I think another question was, what is Morrison County thinking? And again, I don't want to speculate, and that's why we said at the meeting, we're not going to speculate what Morrison County's position or why they did this. So, but again, that 200, I want to keep stressing, I don't want anybody on the board to think that's a carrot that you make your decision based on that. That has nothing to do on the capacity and the outlet issues. Issues on 41, again, the operation plan, you have to rely on somebody. Again, the board will make the decision whether you believe the DNR's a review of the operation plan and the engineers you've had look at this address your concerns on ditch 41, and I'll leave that up to their opinion. They're the engineers. And then I guess all I can say is certainly I can see how people would discuss other projects, but you're the drainage authority for the petition that was brought to you to address under 401. whatever you decide is fine with me. I just have to be able to defend it. And if you decided against it because there's another project, that doesn't follow the criteria of the statute. So another project, in my opinion, to you, should not be, again, just like the 200,000, just like another project, that's a decision the petitioners or the LID or the emergency or the Lake Association, whatever they went through, you got the petition you got. So I think I'll stop there unless you have questions of me, so.
Madam Chair, I got a question for you, Kurt. Was it ever brought up about doing a joint county ditch?
Yes, but we decided that that would not be the proper way to go because this is not going to be the statute uses regular and substantial, meaning if we made it a joint ditch, then the landowners on Chaminade would all have to be individually assessed, and we felt, and I feel, and we talked about it in our office, an outlet fee, it's somewhat like a use fee. When they use it, they're gonna be paying an outlet fee for that.
Because that would be similar to JD2 on Lake Osakis, where they wanted to come in, some of the people wanted to come in and tax everybody around Lake Osakis for JD2 because they benefited.
Right, and that's why that just causes all kinds of issues when you have a situation such as this. That's why the statute says outlet fee. Outlet fee is if you change outlet fee to use fee, it's like anything else in government when somebody pays to use somebody, that's what they're paying.
So is the outlet fee a one-time payment or is it yearly?
Well, the statute contemplates a one-time payment, but I can't categorically say that the board is one of your conditions. Couldn't say so much. I don't know that. If we ever get to that point, we'll have to talk about conditions. Generally, it's a one-time fee.
Okay, because what concerns me is the condition of County Ditch 41, not having it cleaned out in 100 years, or any of the laterals, or any of the branches, okay? And I sit on the Sauk River Watershed Board, and I've watched Houston, because they do a lot of the engineering, come in, and some of them ditches are $1.5 million to clean it out. So is it fair, this is my question, is it fair to the residents of Todd County to come in and say, okay, we're gonna have to do a redetermination of benefit, 100 grand, clean out? And like I said, if it's 1.5 million, what these people don't understand is if you got a lot of land on ditch 41, your assessment could be $100,000, $200,000, and how are you gonna pay that? They gotta realize that.
Well,
That has never been discussed to these people in Todd County saying, hey, there is a cost if you're gonna take their water on and there becomes issues 2-3 years down the road. Who's gonna pay for that? The benefited residents on County Ditch 41.
that's why, in my opinion, you have the engineers, including your own consulting engineer, has to answer the question, ditch 41 in its current condition, does it have the capacity operated under these to handle this water? If it doesn't, or if there's a high spot in the ditch and you made one of the conditions that be repaired, I don't know if I'm explaining this well. The ditch is what it is right now, and you need to rely on somebody that if the operation plan is run the way they say it's gonna be run, will 41 be able to handle it in its current condition? That's the question I would be asking the engineers.
Right, and Kurt, we can't control God,
Right.
okay? Right now, it's not,
Absolutely.
we're starting to get rain, but we hadn't rained all summer. But, there could be years where they might not be able to turn their pumps on at all in Chaminade because we might have too high a water.
And
Then
that
what
came up at
happens?
the last hearing. It's theoretically possible that if we got the wrong weather conditions, they'd never be able to turn their pumps on.
Right, and it could happen.
It could happen, and if I recall the last hearing, they acknowledged that that's a possibility.
Kurt, I have a question.
Sure.
When they petitioned us, that research was done when? I mean, we're getting information that a lot of this stuff had been done several years ago. You know, maybe this vote was taken several years ago. When was the research actually done on this ditch and them going forward with this?
Well, again, I guess they'd have to answer that as far as the petition was submitted. I assume they had done feasibility studies, engineering, and now they've come forward with an operation maintenance plan that you had Mr. Helget and Mr. Luker look at to see if they'd make any changes in it to make sure that 41 people are not adversely impacted. So, again, I'm getting put in the position of for or against. I'm not for or against. I'm just trying to answer the question. So you know that.
Yeah.
One minute you'll think, that guy's really against it. The next minute, that guy's really for it. I just need to be able to defend whatever you decide.
We're just asking questions.
Yeah. So.
Okay. More speakers?
Thank you. My name's Bob Engel. I'm a resident on Lake Chaminade. I'm on 34294 Aztec Road. I'm also the spokesman for the Lake Chaminade Emergency Task Force. I'm also on the board of the Lake Chaminade Association, and I've been a resident or had property on the lake since 1987. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity here to talk. I thought we originally were at this hearing to determine if the ditch had capacity. And I think I've read numerous engineering reports recently, that were done recently, that show that it does have the capacity. The project was voted on last year. You're hearing from some folks here who are opposed to it. Some of the folks on our own task force were kind of split on this. But we've studied our watershed, and it's my determination, or our determination, that corrections need to be taken. And the pumping is probably the quickest solution to our problem on the lake of high water. If we try to tackle, and I've been in front of Steve Bukowski, the engineer, I was participant in getting the $200,000 from the commissioners in Morrison County. They gave us a favorable vote to help us with what we called turn off the faucet, which was going to prevent more water from coming in and divert some of that water through the ditch system. Unfortunately, we were unable to successfully get all of the drainage releases we needed. We got almost all of them except from a couple of property owners, which I totally, understand. And the opportunity came up to say, okay, the lid came to me and they asked me how I felt about that 200,000. Would it benefit the lid if they got a favorable agreement from you folks to allow that outlet project to successfully put water in your ditch system? And I said, it makes a lot of sense to me. It's a win-win. Morrison County is putting skin in the game. We've put a lot of work and effort into this. We've identified a lot of things. Why not? Let's put the money towards this to help with this. We don't want to make our problem your problem. I think that's a pretty good offer anytime we can do that kind of thing. So that's it. We also understand there's a lot of things here that we've looked at. A lot of people are bringing up the risks, but I think the engineers have done their modeling based on a lot of these 100-year markers for ditches. I don't want to go on too long. I didn't even plan on speaking today, but so I want to apologize too for any confusion that someone like me comes up and says, I'm with the task force. They go, wait a minute, who's that? I know that Shannon Westheim pointed out to us, who are these guys? We're confusing people. We have the lid, we have the Lake Association, now we have a task force, we have some other folks here too. All of us are passionate about solving this problem on our lake. So I apologize for the confusion if we've just created another group that has confused people. So just so you know, we are part of a committee. We operate under the lid. And we also operate with with money through the Lake Association. And so we're just trying to do everything for the benefit of everyone. The lid, I just want to remind folks that the lid is a local government unit. The Lake Association, as a Lake Association, we decided to create a lid about 5 or 6 years ago because we were having an outbreak of milfoil on our lake. And so one of the things we were doing, the Lake Association was made up of a bunch of volunteers, folks on the lake who wanted to give $20 a year to be part of it. Well, with 330 properties, we were only getting about 60% of participation. So as things came up, we were starting to spend more money on this. We thought we need a better funding source, and this thing called a lid is the latest thing. Other lakes around the area, Lake Alexander has one, Fish Trap Lake, Crookneck Lake, so we created one. And so it's been 6 years in the works. A lid has to make a budget 1 year ahead of time. They can't pivot and say, somebody comes up with an idea and says, hey, we could use some of that money over here. No, the county has to look at it. You're probably familiar with some. Maybe you have some lids on in your county. They have to come to you with a budget. You have to approve it because then it goes to the assessor's office and they determine which property owner, how much each property owner gets assessed. So just so you know, folks presented and said the lid didn't want to have any part of our project. Like, wait a minute, you can't just come in and say, we need 20,000, we could use your help. It's like, okay, maybe after we present it to our constituents, take a vote, and then bring it to the county, get it approved, then it can be assessed for the next year. So the lid's not able to just pivot and say, oh, here's 20 for you, here's some for you. It all has to be approved. So lots of rules to this. And then just so you know too, we talked about correcting the watershed. I've worked with Steve Bukowski he's the licensed engineer over in Morrison County. We've looked at some of the things that need to be corrected that were changed 20 years ago that are causing our flooding. And he's been really good to us. Spent a lot of time with us, but a lot of these things are going to take years to fix. So for us to say, let's fix the watershed, that'd be great, but we can't control a lot of those things. So just see, I guess that's about it. The LIDS project, the last thing I want to say, the LIDS project will give us all an opportunity to reinvest in our property over there to bring it back to where it was prior to some of this flooding. And then as far as everyone else, you're hearing from a lot of people. You're gonna, there's a lot of folks that are really passionate about this problem. There's a lot of people you're not hearing from that want it fixed and support the lid. So that's all I have to say. Any questions? All right, thanks you guys.
Hi there. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jen Buckentine. I reside at 2122 County Road 137 in Waite Park, and my lake place is at 2648 Lakeshore Drive on Chaminade. And a lot of the notes I had written down have already been stated, so I'm going to try not to repeat too much, and I'll keep my comments brief. But we live on the south side of Lake Chaminade, and we too have been affected by the high water. 2 years ago, when the water reached its peak, we lost our foundation on our cabin. So we're currently in the process of repairing that and going to be sticking in excess of $70,000 to $80,000 into our cabin. Meanwhile, still paying the mortgage on the cabin. So, but I know you have heard a lot of these stories. I guess, some of the main points I want to make is the lid has been at this for years. They have worked with different engineers. They have researched different pumping plans, different outlet plans, had the first plan gone through or the second plan gone through, which were both overwhelmingly supported by landowners on the lake, we wouldn't be sitting here sticking $70,000 into our cabin this year. So, you know, we're passionate, like Bob said, we're all passionate about it. Everyone wants the problem fixed. There's a difference in opinions how that should be done and how much money should be spent to fix it. But at some point, we have to rely on the professionals who are educated and trained to do the analysis. We have to rely on the engineers. And, you know, if their analysis is telling us that the ditch in its current state it can accommodate the flow, I feel we need to rely on that and not speculate something could go wrong. If there's a plan in place to address issues, potential issues, I don't know what we would have to lose by approving it. So I guess I would just ask that you keep that in mind. As Mr. Dieters had said, the request before you is to allow the water to flow into ditch 41, and in our opinion, the LIDS engineer, and as I read the other engineer also agreed that there is room and there is capacity to accommodate the flow, so we would respectfully ask for approval for the project. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm Richard Kibitza, and my wife is with me tonight, Cheryl, and I have a frog in my throat. It's been there for a while, so I'm not emotional about the meeting. Just wanted you to know that, okay? I would feel very much in sympathy with the lady who had lost her home, and those of you that have struggled with flood issues. Until we retired in 2008, my wife and I lived for about 12 years in Fargo, North Dakota. We went through the 97 flood. That was a 500-year flood or some such. A 100-year flood came along, followed that one. A third one came along in the 12 years, and they quit trying to guess which flood that was. In that process, we owned a 5-plex and a 4-plex that had 3-bedroom, 3 apartments in the basement, and we ended up spending thousands of dollars to repair those and to revive those apartments. So I understand the issue that you're talking about. We are property owners. Our address is 41989 County Road 7. That Broerville, that is 1 mile south of the property that is being affected. We own 77 acres, which borders County Road 7 and Quicken Road about a mile, would it not be, John? Trentina is here from the Trentina property. Our property lies much lower. My concern, because we're bordered on the east by Fish Trap Creek, Ditch 41 runs through the north end of our property, which 40 acres of it tends to run or below. And with John, I agree, in dry times, we can walk across it. Wet times, we can't use the meadows, we can't use what was pasture land. My concern is that if water is dumped into 41, it is going to continue to back up and make even what property we have usable, it'll encroach on that, it'd be not usable. I've heard it said here tonight that the engineers said it can handle the flow. Our property, I can't see the ditch 41 on the 40 acres it runs through. I can see where there's a culvert and the ditch is supposed to be. I can walk all the way through that property and there isn't really any ditch there. It just is non-existent. So the water backs up on our property and then oozes through those culverts. The ditch keeps it from just flowing through. I'm not really for or against, but I've heard, and it's been a little confusing, that it sounds like there isn't really a good plan for cleaning out ditch 41 so it will flow properly and freely. I would like to see that addressed. In '05, my brother was still with us. We petitioned. I have all those papers with me, and got permission from all the folks that were needing to sign off to hire a private contractor to clean that ditch out across our property. And at that time, $3,000 is what he bid. And I don't know if he thought he bid too little or not, but at any rate, it was either too soft and he couldn't get in, or it was froze too hard and he couldn't get in. Long story, I still can walk across this area and don't know where there's a ditch. I helped my dad farm that property back in the late 50s and 60s. We could see a ditch at that time. Since then, it is filled in between the beavers and just growth. So our property tends to be somewhat of a plug, stopping the free flow. So I would like to see that addressed somehow, that it would be cleared out, that it could flow freely. And I agree with the lady that I feel like I'm just one small landowner with a very small piece in this whole large puzzle. But yet we will be affected if water is pumped into 41. It will back up on our property and just create some issues. And so that basically is all that I wanted to bring to the board tonight. And if you have some questions, I'd be glad to answer them if I could. Otherwise, that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to come up to the podium, though? Otherwise, we're not going to be able to hear you. Okay.
As you probably know, my name's Brian Rappaway. I have property at 320 Quicken Road. I've been sitting here the last couple times, last week, or last month, or whatever it was, and now again, and there's just a lot of concerned people about this project. You know, I don't know if the actual water would affect my property or not. I know John said it wouldn't affect his. I think the big thing here is we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what water, like Mark, I'm going to reference Mark a couple times, what type of water is going to be pumped through this. We don't know if your land is going to flood. There's just so many unknowns here. And the big thing, I don't want to talk about another project, but I think the petition should be denied. The fact is, there is other options that can keep it in Morrison County. I don't think that the people of Todd County should have to worry about this project and everything and what may happen to their land when there is obviously some other ways to take this. And if I'm kind of speaking to the people of Lake Chaminade here, I'm really feel bad for you. I'm kind of addressing you. And I want to just say, you know, if you say my proposal last time was the pipeline to the Long Prairie River, Mark had stated that now if you take the water out of the north side of the lake, it would actually be a half a mile less to pump it than I originally said last time. So that's a big plus in itself. And then he said even there's another river that runs into the Long Prairie River, so you wouldn't actually just be dumping it directly into the Long Prairie River. It'd be shorter yet because it goes to another river. And one thing I have to say to the Chaminade residents, I feel for you, man. I have property near, I know, but don't you think that if you'd put this pipeline in, that you could say, don't you think your property values would increase? If you could put your piece of property on the market and say, hey, we have a plan to keep the flooding down to nothing forever and ever. Now, I know after this proposal is a 3 to 4 year plan you plan on pumping. What's going to happen after the 3 or 4 years? Are you going to take your pipes out of the ground and be done with it? Or are you going to leave them in the ground and then say you get this 100-year flood or whatever? You know, everything, this world is so weird today. And I think everyone believes that we don't know what's going to happen with the weather next. We just do not know. And wouldn't you like to be able to say, okay, let's run the pumps and dump it into the Long Prairie River. We don't have to sit in front of the Todd County people. We don't have to do anything. We throw our pumps and we pump the water. Don't you think that your property values would increase? I mean, for God's sakes, if you have a way to get rid of and make sure a cabin is never going to flood again, wouldn't you go with that instead of have to go in front of the board and say, can we please pump more water through Todd County? Can we please, and hear all this again? No. I mean, for gosh sakes. And as far as Mr. Houston and the engineering firm, don't you realize they're selling you a plan? I mean, you pay to have the water measured, you pay to turn the water pumps on. He's going to go home to Maple Grove or whatever and say, yeah, I sold them, man. Give me my blue star for the day. I got this new account, and they're going to pay us X amount of dollars for X amount of years. Aren't I the star employee? I feel for everybody involved here. I feel it all. I'm very passionate about this, otherwise I wouldn't even be here. But I really think if the proposal should be denied on those facts that I stated. And really, I think that the lid should rescind their proposal tonight. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to speak?
And then if Chris could also
Oh,
check
we have one more.
online before we go online, but
Okay.
make sure we cover that.
If
too.
you'd like to come up.
My name's Nicole Robinson. Sorry I was late. I'm a nurse at the hospital in St. Cloud, and I got mandated to stay for a little while, so I apologize to you. I have a cabin at 2674 Lakeshore Drive, but we also have a property that's a mile away from Ditch 41 in Todd County. So we could be affected, we could not be affected. But I feel like the engineers, they're the professionals, like I'm a professional at the hospital. You guys, they'll rely on me to take care of you at the hospital. I have to rely on them to know and have the knowledge, the best knowledge to give in this situation. And so I trust the lid, and I trust Houston and the other engineering company to give us the best information possible. And there's been many opinions on how we should pump the water and get the water away from the lake. And that's, we've agreed on this for 74% of the lake owners that this project should go on. But there's the 26% that are opposing and are very loud with their opposing situation also. But we, as a whole lake, want this to go through. And like I said, we just have to listen to the professionals. And I think a lot has been addressed in the last meeting, because I was here in the last meeting, on whether it can or cannot, whether it's going to get cleaned out or not, the ditches, and I think a lot of that has already been addressed. So I would hope that we can continue a project that has taken so many years, so many years, and so many hours of people going forth in finding a resolution to our situation. And like I said, our property in Todd County could be affected, and I don't know. It just depends. But they say, they've given you a lot of restrictions, or at least restrictions on the pump. If it does get too high, we have to stop, because we don't want to affect the property owners on Todd County. So those stops are in place already in the plan, and that needs to be considered. So I just would hope that you guys would take that into consideration, that there are a lot of stipulations through both counties, and even right now, Morrison County, I've been working on a project with Amy Kwalzik for, 4 years now, and I'm still not approved to do anything, because there are so many loopholes that you have to go through the county, through the DNR, through the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm learning this step by step, and I'm sure you guys are very familiar with all those loopholes that you have to go through also. So please take account of the professionals that are doing their job and what it can hold, what it can't hold, and all the stop signs that they have put in place to allow us to pump some of our water into your ditch without having an impact on the landowners. Thank you.
We have a gentleman and then Karen.
Yes.
I see that, okay.
Mike DeGeest, 335th Avenue, Cushing. I'm just on the Fawn Lake Township Board, and I guess my only question is if the lid runs out of money and who in Morrison County is gonna take over. I mean, we haven't heard from anybody in Morrison County, just that they gave permission to the lid to take over the project, and that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't, maybe I should let the lid people talk, but they're a taxing authority, so they won't run out of money as long as the board approves their budgets. So that's why you form a lid, is so that you have a dedicated funding source.
Okay. Does that answer your question, kind of? Okay, thank you. Chris?
Madam Chair, I have Karen Zita, who is prepared to speak. So Karen, if you want to unmute your mic and go ahead, state your name and your address.
Yeah, hi, I'm Karen Zita. I live at 33968 Pulaski Road. And my question is, that blue line ditch that they dug runs naturally through our property. And when we get a 3-inch rain, we flood here. So then that was why we didn't want the water from Shamana coming through our property. So the new project is supposed to divert the water from at Pulaski around our property. And my question is, how do they divert that water? Because we don't want to completely dry up. We have a duck pond that the DNR helped build, so we don't want that to dry up, but we don't want the excess water. And so I'm just curious, how do they let the natural water flow through here, and how are they going to divert the Lake Shamana water? And I guess that's all I have to say.
I think that's an excellent question, and when we get to the engineers, I'm going to make sure that either Mr. Opat, probably Mr. Opat, addresses that issue. I think it's an excellent question, and that landowner needs to have an answer to that. So when we get to that, make sure that I have Mr. Opat try and answer that diversion question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, we have Ray Gruber who would like to speak. Ray, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Yeah, good evening. Ray Gruber, 1818 West Shamana Drive. And my question is, with all the fail-safes that I've heard proposed throughout these meetings, I feel that, and I'm wondering if it hasn't already been done, that a signed guarantee that there wouldn't be any lawsuits against the Lake Shamana property owners from Ditch 41 and its lateral landowners. After people losing, pretty close to losing their properties because of high water, I sure wouldn't want to see any of us lose our properties due to lawsuits. So whoever you can pass that question over to, if there's any chance of a lawsuit, I stand with, I am against this going through Todd County. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Kurt?
I want to give an honest answer without sounding sarcastic. There's no guarantee. There are lawyers, so there are lawsuits. So that's all I can. That's all I can say.
Good, honest answer.
He just said that out loud.
Okay, Chris, you have more online?
If anybody else online would like to speak, please either raise your hand in the participants box, otherwise just unmute your mic, state your name and your address. Madam Chair, I don't believe there's anybody else at this time.
Okay, we have a gentleman here that would like to speak. Would you like to speak? Okay.
And, I'm Butch Keppers, and I lived in the area for all my life, and worked around Chaminade, many cabins there. Anyway, back in '72, this thing flooded. The lake flooded, and they had to pick up their cabins and bring them back, and then put fuel in there, so they stood up a lot farther. Well, now it's happened again. So what I figured out, I don't know if you can do it or not, but if you take it out of Chaminade, if you're going to pump it down like 2 feet, or whatever you want to pump it, take her down 1 more foot, and then use that for a sump. You know, when the creeks and stuff run into Chaminade, and we got, like say, we got a 10-inch rain, the river's going to be full, or the creek is. Take and stop the pumping until that, but you still got a foot, you know, a foot of reservoir there, and then that'll keep the farmers and stuff on the creek, you know, from getting flooded. Let the water go through from Alec and Fish Trap in through the creek, and then take and when that slows up after a couple of days, then kick Chaminade in and bump her down another foot, you know. But it'd be just like a reservoir there. You know, you'd be working on a foot of water there, you know. I remember in '72 they had 9 inches, I think, flooded that place. So, you know, if they took and had a reservoir there, maybe they could, you know, and pump that water, you know, out to Highway 10, and then you only got a 3/4 mile or a mile to turn south and then pump it. And it gets there, then it's all gravity. It'd be easy to control, and I think the farmers would, I can't speak for them, but I would think they would, you know, if you controlled it decent, you wouldn't have no flooding anyway. But that's what I was thinking of anyway. Talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.
And again, my only response would be there may be some sense to holding areas, but the DNR controls the level you can take public water, and lakes are public waters. So again, we wouldn't have the jurisdiction to say how low you could take the lake. That's a DNR decision.
Any other public comment at this time?
Yeah, my name is Tom Schuler. I'm at least a 50-year resident of the lake. What I'd like to say is this, is that the water has already done the damage. The 100-year-old trees are gone. Its foundations are gone. There's nothing that the lid can do to bring any of that back. And to date, I think the task force has pumped out more water than anybody else. But what I'd like to say is that we were told at our annual meeting last Saturday, I think, that the $3.5 or $3.35 million project that is budgeted for is not subject to any more votes by the LID membership. So whatever that project ends up being, we're on the hook for it. And as it stands right now, it's about 10 grand per property owner, maybe more, because there's less property owners that we don't know where they went. But at any rate, I think it'd be better to find a smaller project that is quick and easy. If we had the proposed project in place right now, it would take somewhere around 75 to 90 days to pump the lake down to the OHW level. Then they'd be shut off. And maybe they'd be used again, I don't know. But it would seem to me, coming up with a better, smaller project would allow the landowners to use some of that $10,000 for reclamation of their properties that right now are in shambles. That's nothing against Todd County. You guys are just kind of getting brought into this thing as a matter of convenience, because there are other projects within Morrison County. It's too bad that we're trying to make this part of your problems too. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening to us, all of us. There's not anybody on the lake that doesn't want to get that water down by hook or crook or whatever means. It's just the size of the project that we're concerned with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else like to speak? Kurt?
And Madam Chair, if you look at the agenda, and I hesitate to do this, but I just want to give the chair the opportunity. I don't want to waste any time tonight, but do we want a 2-minute stretch? You know, I don't want this, I know how these go sometime, but I'd be saying we start at 7:45, just enough for people to get up and move around a little bit, if that's all right, Madam Chair.
That's fine.
We'll reconvene at 7:45.
That's okay. It's better for an attorney to say.
Oh, okay. All right. You would both your man? Yep.
But it looks good.
You gotta really have capacity, up on iron, those sorts of things. I'm gonna like the subdivision, liability issues, that has the capacity that's required. I'm gonna do my best to reference those documents to lead submitted to the record. I'm still gonna do it detailed. It's interesting to me too, having worked on these projects, I think everybody recognizes.
Cool, man.
It's not like, yeah, you can't pull the plug and.
Am I running late?
Oh,
I had to write this down.
are we
before.
going to time you?
Yeah.
Has a lot of, whenever you want to move water across one area to another, the DNR has a lot to say about it. It's not.
Yeah, I gotta go real quick, but I had to write this down.
It's not a bunch of
I
people
poured myself some.
running on the channel and hoping it'll work.
Oh, no, I don't want that.
If it were only that easy. Then you wouldn't have the channel. This isn't the final approval we need either. We got a lot of sleep. Yeah, I know. I've got copies of it. I am, yes. Jerry. Hi, Jerry. Thank you for your. Does that help out?
We're missing a
Oh,
commissioner.
okay, sorry. They never gave me the gavel. I shouldn't have used it.
Try
Okay.
I did reach out to the DNR to see if they have any old records, and I haven't.
Press the button.
A lot of times, believe it or not, we have to go out and do soil boring and look for old sediment and old stuff. We could say that the erosion clean can't be deeper than that's what we've done soil boring and looked for pollen and stuff in there and try to figure out what it was 100 years ago.
That's old.
Well, if there are high spots in there,
Kurt?
Okay, where the hell is it?
but that's where we've accounted for that in the operating.
Let's come up and ask.
Oh, I see, that's fine.
And we've got one on.
That's fine.
Okay.
As far as going back to clean it out.
Or just tap or microphone.
Okay, we will try to bring the meeting back to order.
All right. Can't go all night.
We did have a couple of questions that were asked, and they were asking if they could come up and speak before us, and so we'll go ahead and allow them to do that before we go on to the next step. Yep, come up and introduce yourself.
Mike DeGeest, I just had a follow-up question. If the lead or the lid dissolves, what happens? Who in Morrison County is going to take that over? You know, just is it going to be the ditch authority? Is it going to be the board, or is it? I'm hoping that they never dissolve, just for the fact that we don't want to deal with it either. You know, but who's gonna take that position over? If that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll try and answer it with a non-answer. I don't know. But as a formed government entity, my understanding is it's very, very difficult to, it's not like you just say, let's disband. There's a whole very detailed process, and I think if anybody really objects, it's hard to disband a lid. that being said, without being an expert on lids.
Okay, and then Chris?
Madam Chair, we do have another person requesting to speak. It's Ray Gruber again. Ray, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, this is Ray. My question is, it's an engineering question. We've heard a lot about the capacity of the ditch, the capacity of the culverts and all that, but we really, from Houston, we really haven't had much information other than basically, in a roundabout way, is don't worry about it, about the laterals and the amount of farmland that, you know, either pastures or crops, whatever, could get flooded out. And I kind of wonder why this really hasn't been, you know, it's more or less, it's been a non-topic. And, you know, getting back to the idea of what your lawyer said, I can be sued. That would be, to me, who the people would sue would be the people who lost farmland, or, you know, their pastures or their crops or anything due to a flood coming through because of our water. Even if it isn't, I'm sure, you know, it could be viewed as that. So let's let the engineers answer what the thoughts are on the laterals. Should there be a clog in ditch 41? Thank you.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
I think that is a good segue into, unless there's something else, into the consulting engineer that you call at the last hearing. You retained Bolton and Mink to basically answer 3 questions. One was capacity of the system. 2, any suggestions or their review of the operation and maintenance, because as the board and I discussed, I'm not an expert on operation and maintenance plan. And then the third thing that Mr. Gruber raised, if I recall right, we specifically asked the engineer to look at any impact on the laterals. So there may be more things they'll talk about, but those are the 3 things I recall. So maybe we should go into the 2 engineers, Mr. Helgett and Mr. Luker, giving their reports. So.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. I'll introduce myself. My name is Bill Helgett. I've been with Bolton & Mink for about 23 years, mostly in hydraulics and in rural drainage 103E systems. With me tonight is Sean Luker. Sean's been with us for about 16 years as well. Many of those in hydraulics and rural drainage 103E systems as well. So we are familiar with the 103E systems here. So why are we here tonight? As Kurt noted, Minnesota Statute 103E allows the Drainage Authority to seek engineering input from a consulting engineer. So basically, a second opinion is what we're here to give you. Our scope of work was to review the hydraulic model, review the capacity analysis, and review the draft operating plan. So we're here to report on that tonight. The materials reviewed, we reviewed the petition for the outlet, the HECRAS model, the original ditch plans of 1916, the survey information that was provided to us, Houston's presentation information, and also the draft operating plan. Version 5 is what's in here. There is a version 6, and we have looked at that, but we're reporting on version 5 tonight here. So if we start out by looking at the hydraulic model, you probably heard plenty about this. I won't go into depth, but it's developed by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's for predicting water depths within streams, so it's a good program for that. It was, for this base model, was constructed by the DNR. Houston supplemented many of the parameters in there, the cross sections and survey information has been put into the model. The hydraulic model was then calibrated using survey information. So what that means is they went out there, shot the water level throughout the system all the way down. When they run the hydraulic model, they compare the water depths in the system with their survey information, and they find a flow that goes with that. What we found out is about 30 CFS corresponds with what they surveyed the day they were out there. So they did calibrate the model. If there's some big variation in the model, it usually tells you there's a parameter missing, a culvert not sized right, or something's off. But it was looking pretty good with the 30 CFS flow running through it. Just to be clear, our review was focused on County Ditch 41 system only. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the entire system from pump station all the way through. Our review focuses on the County Ditch 41 system, so from the railroad tracks to the river. So we reviewed the model inputs. We looked at the flow data, the cross-section data, the roughness coefficients, bridge and culverts, went through all that information, and we found the inputs to be accurate and within the values typically used for this type of system. We verified that the calibration of the model did match the surface water elevation shot in the field. Therefore, we do concur that the model was within normal engineering standards. So it looked like the model was set up correctly, so we went on to review the capacity analysis. The capacity analysis typically relates to the impacts of the additional flow, what it'll have on the existing conditions. So basically it's existing conditions versus a proposed conditions scenario. So if we look at the existing conditions in County Ditch 41 system, the ditch bottom width is 14 feet on the upper part of the system, and it's 18 feet wide as you get close to the river there. So it's a fairly wide open ditch system. The ditch slopes range from 0.02% to 1%, and that was reflecting in the model there. So if we look at the proposed conditions, the proposed project includes a pump station with a maximum pumping capacity of 10 CFS that has the ability to be turned on and off. So you have that ability to shut it off if something doesn't look right, or we'll talk about some triggers and stuff in here. So. In this system, the 10 CFS from the pump station equates to approximately 0.14 feet of water depth. So wherever the water level is, if the pump is kicked on, that equates to about 2 inches of additional water within the ditch system, wherever that water level is. So if the water level in the ditch system is falling and the pump's running, it's 2 inches of water. If they shut that pump off, that 2 inches goes away. So just to be clear on as wide as this ditch system is, and with the slopes here, it's about 2 inches. As you get lower in the system, the section of the ditch gets a little smaller, because it's getting smaller. Then that goes up a little bit. So it goes from 2 inches up to about 3-4 inches as you get deeper. But when we talk about the max operating level, and we'll talk about that here, that's about 2 inches. So with the proposed system, you have the ability to control the additional flow of that 10 CFS, and with the size of the open ditch, it was verified that County Ditch 41 does have capacity to convey the additional 10 CFS at certain times. So when are those times is kind of the question about when can we add that 10 CFS. So the review then focused on full flow capacity of the ditch system. So this is the point of the ditch system where the water has gotten to a point where it's about to overflow the banks. So we want to make sure that we're not causing flooding or causing some adverse impacts when the pumps are running. So we wanted to make sure that what that level was at. Houston determined that the full flow capacity of the ditch is about 100 CFS. So at 100 CFS flowing through the ditch system, the water should remain in the banks of the ditch system. They call that the maximum operating level. So remember that phrase, as we'll be using it a lot. So the maximum operating level is the peak flow before we start flooding. So the model was reviewed at the maximum operating level, so we cranked it up to that 100 CFS, and we looked at the main open ditch of County Ditch 41. We did find one cross section that showed water just barely coming out of the banks, and that was about right near the lateral 3 connection. Most of the other cross sections were 6 inches or more below the banks of the ditch system, so it was below the overbearing, flowing outside the banks. So in most cases, it was well below. We did find one cross section that was just barely over the top of it. We did verify too that the 18-inch culvert through 311th Avenue, the water level was below that. So that's that Fish Trap Creek connection. So it was below that 18-inch culvert, so it's not able to flow into that Fish Trap Creek connection. And that's again at that maximum operating level, that 100 CFS. So we looked at each of the crossings along the main when the water depth was at that maximum operating level. So as you see up on the screen there, Pulaski Road, is a 16 by 6 inch box culvert. At maximum operating level, which is at 100 CFS, 62% of the culvert is being utilized. So the culvert is 62% full at that maximum operating level. At Quicken Road, the 12 by 6 box culvert, 44%, so less than half of the culvert is being utilized when it's running at that maximum operating level. At County Road 28, 31% of the culvert is being used when we're running at that level. So we got some information. There was about 3.14 inches of rain in the last 10 days. This is a picture that was taken. This was a picture that was taken yesterday that showed the culvert at Quicken Road. So we're still with the three inches of rain. I know it's been dry, but with the 3 inches of rain, we're still operating at below that 100 CFS level. So if you were looked at it today, we would still be operating at less than 100 CFS. Then we looked at the County Ditch 41 laterals, and we looked at the stage increase and the impact of the additional 10 CFS, or that 2 inches of water, for each of the laterals. This is a little hard to visualize, but I'll try to do my best. So in the main open ditch, the water level is at a level. When the pump turns on, that's going to reflect up the ditch laterals. That 2 inches carries up the laterals. So how far up the laterals does it go? That depends on the slope of that lateral. So if we do the math for lateral 1, we raise it 2 inches at that 0.06 grade up the lateral, the water will extend another 233 feet up the lateral. So as the pitch of the ditch or the lateral goes steeper, it doesn't go as far, that 2 inches. So does that make sense? Okay. All right, then we looked at lateral 3, since that was one of the largest laterals. The surface water levels were surveyed at the time the model was generated. The survey showed 5.28 feet of elevation difference between the main ditch and the north side of County Road 7. So remember, when the survey was completed, the model was running at 30 CFS. That's what we calibrated at, or that's what they calibrated at, and that's what it ended up being, was 30 CFS. So the full effect is, what is it running, or what's it like when it's at the maximum operating level? So that 5.28 feet, so main is here, lateral's up here. Now we increase the model up to 100 CFS, so when the main goes up, the lateral goes up. So that was reflected into the model, so we cranked that up. There was some assumptions, let's see here, resulted in the water surface of being about, when that went up, when we compared it to the 1916 plans, the water elevation did end up going outside the ditch by about 0.2. So it was above the ditch, so it was overflowing is what it told us. That was compared to the 1916 plans, so they're hand-drawn, but we used some elevations from the top of the road down to the bottom of the ditch, compared the two because we had survey information for that. It showed it going above that ditch bottom by about 0.2. There were a couple assumptions that were made with that, but that's what based on the information we had, that was the conclusion that we had, is that it did go over top of the bank by 0.2 feet. So based on that information, we do recommend that the maximum operating level be lowered 0.2 feet. So the recommended maximum operating level, that 100 CFS, we recommend lowering that. 0.2 feet is what we want to be, and that's really based on those triggers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. So therefore, we do concur that County Ditch 41 has capacity to accommodate the 10 CFS. From the pumping station, when County Ditch 41 is operating below that maximum operating level. So when it's flowing at a low enough rate, it does have capacity to handle the flow. So now that we verified that the model looks good and we analyzed the maximum capacity of the open ditch, we then turn to the operating plan. So we reviewed that. The operating plan includes operation parameters, monitoring requirements, these are the things that tell you when the pump can run, when you can turn that pump on, when it needs to be off. And that's all to protect the downstream landowners, to not cause any adverse impacts. If I can paraphrase, no pain. The operating plan also includes maintenance of the system, and then also the process to modify this operating plan. So looking at the draft operating plan, again, we reviewed version 5, and our comments will be related to that version. I believe many of these comments have been addressed in version 6, but we're going to go through these these comments here. So the operating plan states that Todd County will be notified when the change of the operation of the pumping station. So if the pumping station's turned on, someone at Todd County needs to be notified. The plan did not say who, so we want to better define who that person is or who that group of people are, so we know who's being notified. So we recommend an email notification be sent out to the ditch inspector, the engineer, and the coordinator. So they should be the ones being notified. We also recommend a calibration and maintenance schedule of the pump station, just to verify that that pump station is truly pumping at 10 CFS. In lieu of a calibration, a flow meter could be installed on the lift station as well, and then you'd have an instantaneous reading of how much flow is coming out of the lift station. So it'd be a way of checking that we're at that 10 CFS or below that 10 CFS. So the operating plan called out proposed trigger elevations. Those proposed trigger elevations are both a depth and an elevation. So the depth that were proposed in the operating plan was at 3.7 at Pulaski Road, 2.8 at Quicken, and 2.8 at County Road 28. The elevation is important to have in there as well. Just in case you replace a culvert, you're always able to reestablish that elevation at that location. So the recommended trigger elevation, so based on that adjustment of that 0.2 feet in the maximum operating level, we recommend the depth at Pulaski Road being 3.5, the elevation at Quicken Road being 2.6, and the County Road 28, that depth could also be 2.6. There's a star by that. There, in the operating plan that we reviewed, there was an elevation discrepancy, making that elevation discrepancy correction. That could easily be 2.6. So I'd recommend lowering it an even 0.2 feet for all 3 of the triggers in that area. So, okay. The operation plan states that the pumping operations will be discontinued in the spring of each year, and if there is a potential for flooding or high water conditions. Just for clarity again here, we recommend that spring be defined by a date. Spring can be all over the place depending on what we use. If we use spring load restrictions or other things, maybe this be defined by a date. We also recommend that pumps not be operated prior to that spring date without prior approval of the drainage authority. We recommend defining the potential for flooding. That's someone who, everybody might give a different determination of what that potential for flooding is. We say we're recommending either define that or get rid of that and base it on what the actual elevations of the water are out in the field. So if that language is to stay in there, we just recommend define who determines the potential for flooding is great enough that the pumps be turned off. So. All right, then we move to downstream monitoring. We recommend daily readings be taken when the water levels are within 0.2 feet of the triggers. I think the original plan showed 0.1 feet. That's a pretty tight tolerance, so we just opened it up to 0.2. We recommend the pumps will not run until the water levels fall below the 0.2 feet lower than the triggers. So pump turns off when the water's up here, the water levels are falling, you hit the trigger point here, but if you remember, we turn the pumps on, it jumps up 0.14 right away, right? So we recommend going down 0.2 below that until they can turn the pumps back on. It'll jump up that 2 inches, and then it will continue to fall if there's no rain events for that. So we recommend that the pumps not run until the level falls that 0.2 feet below that. With downstream monitoring, also we recommend daily readings for rain events greater than 1 inch. We recommend that they be taken for at least 3 days or until the water level rises at a rate of less than 0.05 feet per day. So what this is saying is, ditches are not usually very flashy. When you get a rain event, it takes a little bit for those ditches to start rising. We say monitor them on a daily basis, just so we're not clipping up to that trigger, because before that, you might have been at a bi-weekly frequency rate. If we get a rain event, let's watch it, see where it goes. If it levels off, they can continue pumping. If it continues to rise, the pump should remain turned off there. Okay, we recommend, when informed by other agencies that the stage is within 0.2 feet of a trigger, that we begin daily monitoring. This is a situation where you may have a beaver dam, or you may get some series of small rain events where that water is starting to climb. If it's not noticed, somebody reports it, that, hey, we respond to it, we go out there and look at it, and then we monitor it daily until another trigger is met. So in the downstream monitoring section of the plan, it discusses the frequency of monitoring and how it relates to significant precipitation events. We recommend that the pumps be shut off if a significant rain event is forecasted, or that a significant rain event should be defined. So if they're predicting 5-inch rain event or something, we're just recommending be proactive, maybe shut the pump system off, let the storm roll through, and then go back, check your triggers. If you're able to pump. If not, leave the pumps turned off. Okay, our next recommendation is related to communication. We recommend that the Drainage Authority have the ability to view these monitoring log spreadsheets. So this is via a website, or sent out weekly if monitoring weekly, or sent out daily if monitoring on a daily basis. We recommend that a visual indicator be placed on the control panel of the pump station that shows if the pumps are running or if they're off. So if someone is curious, they can drive to the pump station, drive by, and there'll be a light that indicates it's either on or a light that indicates that it's off. So someone can check it out for themselves. We also recommend that markers be installed and maintained at each of the trigger locations, and that they be clear and checked every once in a while. We also recommend that marker be installed actually on the apron itself as well, just in case if something happens to the actual marker that's out there, if that gets tampered with or gets moved or from ice or whatever that is. So we did recommend some revisions be made to the monitoring log spreadsheet. The spreadsheet may be hard to read on here, but I'll go through the columns here and why they're up there. And again, this is just an example. So the date, someone goes out there, they put the date in there, they would indicate if the pump station is either on or off. The monitoring locations are indicated on the log. It lists out the maximum depth at each one of those. So if someone's out there monitoring it, if they don't know what them depths are, they actually show it right here on the monitoring log spreadsheet. If they're reading something that's higher than one of those dimensions that are on there, then they know it's a red flag. They can look and see if the pump station is on and off, and if a change needs to be made. The monitoring frequency is always on there, or is also on there, and that tells you, they can put an X in there, where they're at within a system. We put the depths on there to make it easy for that person to also understand when they should be monitoring for the next time as well. We would recommend that you add another column on there, and that would be for a precipitation amount. So if a rain event happens, add that rain event or that depth of rain to the monitoring log. And that's just for really future reference, future discussions. If anything is proposed to be changed, we just have more data to understand what's happening throughout the drainage system during rain events. And then, of course, again, we recommend that this information be shared with the Drainage Authority. Excuse me. So in summary, based on the information that's been provided to us, The model was completed with general accepted engineering practices. The model matches the hydrology of the County Ditch 41 main ditch. The County Ditch 41 has 10 CFS capacity under certain circumstances. The 10 CFS equates to approximately 2 inches of water depth when we're at that maximum operating level, and then 3 to 4 when we're towards the bottom of that. And also that it takes approximately about 12 hours for water to flow through the system. So when that pump runs, or that water runs through the pump to the river, it takes about 12 hours. So just so you know, when the pump is turned off, within 12 hours, the county ditch system has its maximum flow capacity with natural water not being pumped. So within about 12 hours is what we calculated there. So. We recommend the triggers be lowered as noted. That's at 0.2 feet. We recommend that communication protocols be established so far as those notification emails and the sharing of that monitoring log. So we've determined if the operating plan is followed, the model does show that the water from the pump station should remain within the banks of the open ditch and no adverse impacts of County Ditch 41 benefiting landowners should occur. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Then, before we turn it over to a response from the engineer for the petitioners, because I think we need to see where there may be agreement or not disagreement. Could I ask just one question?
Yes.
It's all right, Bill. Bill, the one thing that did jump out at me, that word potential flooding. Everything's triggers in here. Would be, in your opinion, would it be better to be using triggers than subjective potential flooding? Is that possible?
Right, yep, just for clarity, I think, for someone who has potential for flooding, everybody's opinion of that is different. With the trigger, it's a hard elevation, it's a hard measurement that gives a clear determination of where the system is at and when it's flowing, so.
Then, Madam Chair, unless the board has some questions of Mr. Helgett before we go on to what the petitioner's engineer thinks of his recommendations.
Okay, I think we do have some questions.
I have a question. Is the ditch capacity being calculated at current ditch condition or projected clean ditch condition?
It is based on the 1916 plans. In the model, it does have the cross sections in there, right? Thank you. I'm losing my voice. In the model, it does have the cross sections, correct?
My concern being, hearing from some of the landowners, that there's definite stuff that's happened to the ditch throughout years. So are we projecting the water flow projected out from a clean ditch from 1916? Or are we calculating the ditch load off from the current conditions? Kind of the point being, do we have to clean this ditch before we can start the whole project?
Yeah, no, Sean just confirmed that he did check it, and the cross sections, the survey cross sections were inputted into the model. So it is based on that survey information that was collected a year ago.
June of this year.
June of this year.
Cross sections being what?
Cross section is, so if a ditch system looks like this, they're gonna take survey shots in that ditch system all the way through there. So it's actually what's out there as far as the ground elevation, not a proposed, what it was originally designed for. We take those cross sections and then we put that in the model, and that's like a flow cross section.
And how often do they do that cross section then? I mean, do you do it every 100 yards or?
Do you know how often it was?
Yeah, the spacing was certainly farther than every 100 yards. It was spaced out approximately every 1,000 feet. We did send an engineer down the creek with our surveyors to focus on the critical areas where we knew there were constrictions or widenings that we wanted to capture and reflect in the model. So by doing that, I think we got a good picture of what the existing conditions are throughout the 6 miles or so of the main ditch.
So, Madam Chair, to follow up on that, all the branches and laterals are cleaned out? They're functional? You didn't check them, did you?
They're not all cleaned out. Are they functioning? They're functioning at some capacity.
100%, 50%, 75%?
I don't know that I have enough survey information to really answer that question, to be
Okay.
honest with you.
One other thing, Madam Chair. I have a community septic system down by me. The guy that runs it's in Shakopee. He has on his cell phone a program that'll tell him when the pumps are on, off. If they're having an issue with that pump, is there capability of somebody in Todd County of having that on their cell phone?
Yeah, we do a lot of lift stations, even on the sanitary sewer side. I think you're referring to what's called SCADA. So there's a SCADA system that you can actually run the pumps from your iPad. You can control that. It will give you alarms. If something's going off, it'll send you an alarm and notifies you. I guess I wasn't sure if the lid is going to allow that control or viewing from Todd County, but that would be a good question.
Okay.
Because then it would be on a website and it'd be transparent as far as when
Right,
those pumps are running.
right, because then we would know.
Yep.
If-
Yes.
Or no.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, I have a question too. Richard Kavitsa came up here and told us that he lives on ditch 41, and he knows for a fact his ditch is not cleaned out, and the water will pile, per se, puddle on his property. What happens with the property like that?
Yeah. If the ditch is not operating the way it should be operating, he could petition for a repair of that system to correct that problem. But the triggers are set up so if a restriction would happen, they might not all three trigger, you might get one trigger. That could be from a restriction, it could be from a beaver dam, that happens between the triggers. One trigger might be above the level, and the other ones would be okay, yeah.
Know of areas that, such as Mr. Kibitza's, can we go ahead and do a clean out beforehand? I mean,
Yep.
Kirk?
You can do a repair at any time, and I think that's I want to go back to, if I can, Madam
Yeah.
Chair, Commissioner Erickson's question, because I want to make sure the record's clear on this. Your analysis of any adverse impacts on the system are based on survey in the current condition of the system. I just want to make sure of that. Back to, it's not 1916 as if it's all cleaned out. You're assuming it's in as bad a shape as it is now, and even if the pumps run, the triggers will shut it off in its current condition. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Right.
But I think that was an excellent question. You're assuming this ditch will never get cleaned. It may, but if it doesn't get cleaned, your analysis says is that if it's shut off when it's supposed to be shut off, it shouldn't have an adverse impact. I'm putting words in your mouth. Is
Nope.
that true?
But that is correct. If a restriction starts to happen, it'll restrict flow, and it'll just make a trigger happen that much faster. So if the ditch starts closing in, that trigger upstream of that, the water's got to rise faster to get through a smaller hole. So it'll trick that trigger back here if something needs to be fixed.
So, Madam Chair, that kind of triggers a question then,
Yeah.
saying that there is an issue with our ditch. We don't necessarily want to fix it right now, but it triggers the thing to shut the pump off.
That's the risk petitioners take. If whatever, they're taking the risk that a beaver doesn't go in and trigger something, and that's the risk they're taking. They're saying in its current condition, I'll let them talk afterwards, its current condition, if we have these triggers, and Mr. Helgett seems to confirm that, the triggers will kick it off before anybody's adversely impacted, even in its current condition.
And the pump shall remain off until that is corrected, whenever that is. And that'll be part of their DNR permit as well. So if this operating plan is part of their DNR permit, if they operate outside of that, they could lose their DNR permit as well.
So will those alarms be electronically? So if you got a one-on-one bridge here and it kicks in, so who's gonna monitor that?
At this point, they're not electronic. Doesn't mean they can't be, but at this point, they're not electronic. They were talking about having somebody monitor them on a daily, weekly, bi-weekly basis.
If I can, they referring to the lid then?
Sorry, the lid, yeah.
Right. And then providing us the information immediately to make sure if somebody would question that, Nancy, or somebody could go out and check it.
Okay, Kurt, going back to Mr. Kabliska's question again. So if we go ahead and they start pumping, whose cost is the repair at the time? If we already know there could possibly be a problem? Is it Mr. Kabliska's obligation? Is it the lids? Is it the county's?
It's the system, just like any repair. They're assuming they're only gonna run the pump when the ditch is not in good shape. If, for whatever reason, we repair it, which any landowner could come in and say, repair this system, because the statute says we shall maintain the system. So, so the system, I don't know if I answered, if repairs are done, the system will pay for the repair. What they're trying to show, and it sounds like one way or the other, they're trying to show, even if you never do a repair, the triggers will shut it off before anybody's adversely impacted. If you repair it, it should work better. But they know there's no guarantee we're ever gonna put a dime into repairing that thing. I've heard from enough landowners that I think there are some spots, even if you weren't doing this project, there's some spots that need to be repaired in that system.
Well, could we clarify that you said the system will pay for it? Could we clarify?
The landowners.
Thank you.
The landowners, the landowners.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
landowners, that's very, yeah. But that'd be true if we weren't here for this project. That's true regardless of what happens here.
Okay. Are you willing to take a question from the audience, Kurt?
Sure, I'm more than willing, but I wonder if we should get input from the petition, just to see if
Okay.
the recommendations we've heard, I think the questions then will make more sense if we see where there's agreement among the engineers, so if that's all right with the boards. So.
Okay.
So why don't we have the petitioner's attorney or petitioner's engineer respond to the findings of Bolton and Mink and their recommendations?
Sure, and thank you, Kurt, and Madam Chair and members of the board. I'll take the lead on this, and then I'll have Mr. Shockley, the LID's attorney, also add a few words. My name is Mike Opat. I'm with Houston Engineering. I'm the engineer for the Lake Improvement District. I think I'm going to, in the interest of time, be brief. I think, fortunately, we can be brief because the findings of the second opinion, I think, largely supported the original findings. So fortunately for everyone in the room, we don't need to get into a lengthy technical discussion tonight. So with that, I think I'll start by just referring to the documents that the LID had submitted for the record previously, and then were read into the record by Mr. Dieter tonight. So there's a cover letter dated August 27th. There's the response to the Soil and Water Conservation District questions. There's a document prepared by the LID with some research on outlet fees. I don't know if we'll get into a discussion on that tonight or not, so I'm not going to get into that unless the board would like to do so. And then there's a document that addresses each of the recommendations that were identified by Bolton and Mank, and Bill had just gone through those. So, and then in addition to those documents, then we provided an updated operating plan, which is version 6, which Bill earlier alluded to. So with that, I think what I want to stress here, it's covered in the cover letter, in those opening paragraphs, and it's covered in that recommendation document, that the LID has reviewed the recommendations in Bolton and Mank's report, and they are accepting each of those. That recommendation document includes some supporting information and some clarification on those recommendations, but they are accepting those, and they're ready to move forward with those recommendations. And to that extent, we did go ahead and prepare version 6 of the operating plan that incorporates revisions that address each of those recommendations as appropriate. I did provide a copy of that to Bill and Sean. I think they've had a chance to review it. As I understand it, they're okay with it, but I don't want to speak for them, so I'll allow them to confirm that. I will touch on a couple items there real quickly. We specifically addressed the potential flooding questions and the forecasting by basically taking it out. And we're going to focus solely on the actual conditions on the ditch system and not try to get into trying to predict Mother Nature and weather patterns and whether or not the pump will be turned out or not. It's solely going to be based on the conditions we're seeing in the system. As far as the recommendation on defining spring, you'll see some expanded language in there that includes dates and specific conditions in there prior to a certain date and after the certain date. And then in between there, we really left it up to the county to make a decision on whether they can turn it on or off or not. The lid didn't want to get into having to sit down and deal with forecasts and what ifs and potentials. They're simply going to basically leave it if it's obvious that the pumps could be running and the county gives the blessing, they would consider turning it on. But if it's not clear or the county isn't on board with it, they simply wouldn't run it during that time period. Monitoring, again, the tolerances have been adjusted according to the recommendations. You'll note with Bill's recommendations that 0.2 of a foot lowering in the maximum operating plan was tied to lateral 3. I think, from follow-up discussions we had with Bill and in looking at the data, I think we felt that was very conservative. But rather than trying to dig into that further, the lid was willing to just accept that as is, and maybe in the future there'd be some further review of that. But that 0.2 of a foot was something the lid could live with, and including a little more conservative cushion in there certainly is not a bad thing. And so we're willing to move forward with that adjustment to all 3 triggers of a 0.2 of a foot downward adjustment. You'll notice on the back of the operating plan, there's an updated monitoring log that incorporates the suggestions that Bolton and Mank had, along with a couple additions that Bill and I discussed here this week as well. So that one should be ready to go. And then I'd also like to point out on the operating plan that we've removed draft. I think there was some concern about that at past discussions. So at this point, assuming the board is accepting of Bill's recommendations and the changes that the lid has made in accordance with those recommendations, that this would be, the kind of the version of the operating plan going forward here as far as Todd County Ditch 41 and those conditions. So with that, I will then maybe move into a discussion on some of the questions that came up during the testimony, but maybe I'll turn it to the board. Madam Chair, if anyone has questions on what we've covered so far, or if Bill wanted to clarify anything.
Yeah, one note I would have, I don't know that we can finalize the operating plan just because you have the AIS stuff that needs to be inputted from the DNR in there yet. So I don't know that we can.
Right.
But that would be, since this is a document that, is kind of set up to protect the landowners in County Ditch 41, that is one of the conditions we had kind of maybe talked about, is that this document does not change, from what is presented and what you've seen, does not change as far as triggers and that kind of stuff. They will need to update the AIS. Part of that's going to come from their DNR permit, and that will need to be inserted in there as well, right?
Correct. And I'll add to that, Bill, if I can, that you'll notice there are specific sentences in there under modifications to the operating plan, and that includes a statement that the plan cannot be changed without consent of the DNR and the Drainage Authority. So that will provide further protection that there will be no changes to the operating plan, particularly any changes that impact Ditch 41 that would be made without your consent. So,
Madam Chair, I got a question.
Yes.
When did you guys get the operating plan?
What's that?
When did you get the operating plan?
Version 6?
Yeah.
Probably 3 days ago.
last Tuesday.
Tuesday?
Yep.
Well, because I had this emailed to me at 5:30 last night, and I did not really get a chance to review the operating plan, so I was just kind of struck on that, going, what the hell are they sending to me on the last minute?
Yeah.
So,
I received a draft version of it. It was modified actually since then to this date, so it was a work in progress of that.
I think Bill made his recommendations. They had to address those, and I think there were discussions going back and forth. I agree with you. but I think there wasn't any subterfuge. I think they were just trying to get it finalized before tonight's hearings.
All right.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and I apologize for the late delivery on that, but we were going back and forth here on a couple things here as late as, well, just very recently, so. And I'm happy to, answer any questions you might have on that document that you might have tonight as well.
Commissioners? Public? Yes.
I just had one question. How many of the triggers, does it take all 3 triggers to shut it down, or 1 trigger?
One trigger, yep.
That one trigger, so it
Yeah, I'll cover that, Madam Chair, with the question from the audience being, does it take all 3 triggers being hit or just one before the pump would be shut off? And it's any one of the 3 on ditch 41 that if it's met, then the pump would be shut off. So, and Madam Chair, I do have some responses to some of the questions that were raised previously by the public, so I can
Okay,
address
we've got
those.
one more question,
Okay.
if is all right?
Sure.
Yes.
For purposes of erosion, now you said that the height of the water would raise approximately 2 inches. How much faster will it be traveling?
0.1 feet.
Because I've got property that's highly eroded. In fact, part of the creek's not even where it belongs.
Yeah. Leroy, do you want to go to the podium and state your name so it's on the record?
I'm Leroy Smith. I reside in Pillager, Minnesota at 321 Goldenrod Boulevard. I own the property at the site where the creek or ditch 41 flows into the river. And my question was, how much faster will the water be traveling at my site, or the property I own? It's already been eroded greatly over the years. I think you folks testified that that creek was, or that ditch was how many feet deeper than it was planned to be? Was it 10 or 12 feet?
Something like that.
Which, to start with, a 10 or 12 foot ditch is one thing. When you drop it down that deep, you got, in sandy soils, you got much more property eroded. Then it hits a rock. Now it's probably 50 feet off its current site. And, I don't oppose the water going through there, but I want them to leave my property behind. And I think that ditch needs to be straightened out and adjusted so that that happens. Thank you.
And I think we had that discussion a little bit last night, that it's coming into the county road and actually eating out the bank of the county road there. So it's something that we're going to definitely have to look at.
Yeah, to answer the question about the velocity.
Yes.
We did actually calculate that. It's about 0.1 feet per second. So it is a velocity increase, but it is a smaller increase with just the 2 inches of additional flow, so.
Okay. Got a question?
Brian Rapway again, you know my address. My question is to everyone, who's gonna police this without rule? I mean, you have plenty of rules and regulations and triggers and non-triggers in this, but if say this would pass, who on the board or in Todd County is gonna be the so-called police of this? I mean, is it all the lid that's gonna monitor this? People that are hired by the lid that's gonna monitor this? Who is actually gonna say yes or no and sign names for the county to say, yes, this is the right information, no, it's not? And if therefore, who am I as a taxpayer going to be paying for this monitoring? Just a question I'd like answered.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, likely Nancy would be, as they said, they'd be notified, the coordinator, the ditch inspector, and the county engineer. So they'd be the ones that would be the contact person. And so they'll be reviewing it, making sure, and the DNR checks to make sure they're operating within their plans. So I guess that's all I can say. There's plenty of people making sure. I can't speak for the lid, but if they decide, let's go to 30 CFS, the DNR will pull their permit immediately when it's reported to them. So they'd be taking a big risk not to follow their own plan.
Kurt, in this discussion that we've had tonight, do they have the DNR permit yet?
No, that'll be one of the conditions. It's kind of a, not a catch-22, but it's kind of a circular situation. They need the okay that they even have an outlet, and then so one of the conditions, should you grant it, will be things like that the O&M doesn't change, that they receive all permits that are required, that any outlet fee is paid. There's a whole list of conditions. So anyway, in other words, you giving the permission will not start the pump tomorrow. They still have to go through any permitting process they have to go through. So maybe Mr. Shockley has some response. So.
Yeah, thank you. For the record, my name's John Shockley. I represent the LID. Very familiar with operating plans. I work with a lot of clients who have outlet projects and deal with the DNR. And so to the question of, I think the first question was around who's paying for the actual monitoring of the plan. So under the DNR permit, assuming if the county grants the permit, the initial monitoring, so the actual who's going to pay to somebody to check the height or what the pump is flowing out, generally the petitioner pays for that. So we're required to make sure that we can pay for all the operations and maintenance of the project, being the outlet over time. That means that we're doing the initial checks to make sure that the water is at the certain height, that it's not hitting the triggers. That's not to say that it's not being reviewed by the county, it's not being reviewed by the DNR. I think Mr. Dieter is correct that if there's any finding that the petitioner is not reporting it correctly or is not following the rules, DNR will be very quick to pull any permit from the petitioner. Generally how it works, and just to be quite blunt, the LID is a political subdivision, so it's not like your normal property owner. They have a vested interest in following the laws of Minnesota, following the DNR permit requirements. And so we report to the DNR, we report to Todd County, and if somebody feels that the numbers aren't accurate, our intent has always been to be very transparent, like with the heights of the different gauges throughout the process. Somebody from Todd County, whether it be the ditch inspector, whether it be the county engineer, could actually go out there and physically verify the height of the different gauges. I'm going to defer to the engineer whether those can be electronic gauges. They would still have to design, finish the design of the project, but those are sorts of technical issues that could be resolved, how the actual triggers are measured and what the measuring devices are. But that's how it works. The LID is a political subdivision, and so it has the ability to levy for the operations and maintenance of the project long term. So it's not as if we're putting this plan together and aren't able to pay for somebody to go out and actually check the water, check the pumps, make sure they're working. And I know that Mike, I have a few additional responses to some of the questions I heard. I think Mike had some responses to technical questions also. If I may, Madam Chair, may I get into those responses? All right, thank you. So I'll start with that monitoring question here. So I believe there would be options to monitor those downstream locations electronically if so desired. From my experience with other projects, we haven't used those because we haven't needed to. The frequency that is discussed in the operating plan to do manual observations is something that's pretty standard with these types of operating plans, and they've been sufficient to accurately and sufficiently monitor the system. So I would think we can certainly handle that without electronic conditions here on this particular project. And so I think the LID would prefer to pursue that option here. I did highlight many of the comments and questions and opinions that were made. I'm going to focus on the questions that pertain to the capacity of the ditch. as that's the relevance here, as we've talked about, to the statute. But to the extent the board has any further questions or requests for clarifications, I'll be happy to try to do so. I noted there were some questions on the condition of the ditch and whether that was accounted for. I think we've addressed that, and Bill has addressed that all the analysis is based off the current condition. I think there was a question as to when that research was done on the current condition, and the survey information was collected in June of 2021. So we had that collected prior to hearing number 1 earlier this summer, and that information is what's reflected in the modeling and therefore reflected in the operating plan. I think then, just to follow up with that, then if there were any cleanouts or maintenance that is done, that's certainly great. I think everyone would support that, but it's not necessary in order to meet the analysis or the triggers that are incorporated in that operating plan. So the good news there is it's just going to make things better, right? So from that standpoint, a clean out would be good, but it's not necessary to move forward with the operating plan as is. With regard to the questions and comments that Mr. Kubica brought up, I don't have a slide deck here, but I will refer to the landowner map that was distributed. That might help us out here, so I know the board should have that. I know in the audience they may not. On the first page of that map, I believe the property that Mr. Kubica is referring to that he owns is in section 8, maybe section 17 there in the vicinity of lateral 7. Be off kind of to the left side of the page there. So the board may recall during the previous hearing we had the presentation that included maps of the Ditch 41 system, and we talked about what we referred to as the Old Creek Loop. So you'll note here then that Kubica property is on the outer bend of that Old Creek Loop, which based off the county's records was not actually improved as part of the original ditch project. That section of the creek was left, I guess, all natural, and then they put a cutoff in there at Quicken Road through the high point. And so there were no improvements there at the time. And then as we talked about in detail with that maximum operating plan, we set that operating level below the culvert through 311th, which Bill and Sean confirmed. So we're not sending any water down through the Old Creek Loop from the top side. And then you can see here how far away the Kubica property is from the main ditch. We did do some further analysis based on some questions we previously had from Mr. Trout. And then I had some questions from Mr. Brever as well. And Mr. Brever is right next to the Kubica property there. So a very good comparison. Just as a reference, the low area there along the Brever and Kubica property is at an elevation about 1250, which is over 5 feet higher than the water level will be in the main ditch when it's at the maximum operating level. So, and as Bill confirmed, the maximum impact anywhere in the system is going to be about 2 inches when we're at the maximum operating level. So certainly don't envision a significant impact there to Mr. Kubica's property, and nor do we need to pursue a clean out there before we move forward. I want to hit on Karen Zita's question. Karen has a good question there on the bypass channel. So again, we talked about this in detail at the previous hearing. We incorporated a bypass channel to take the 10 CFS equivalent amount of water from the pump and move that around Karen's property and a couple others there on the natural waterway. So we'll do that through control gates on the culverts. Those pipes will also be sized such that they don't take, more than 10 cubic feet per second. So we will not be diverting the natural water from Karen's property, so she'll continue to see that. I know they have a pond there that they like to see full of water and fresh, so we'll continue to do that. If the pumps are not running, the bypass channel will be closed off, so all that natural water will continue to go through there, and when the bypass is open, it's only going to take the 10 CFS from the pump. And then just to build off of the response to Mr. Smith's questions on erosion, we'd also talked about that at the last hearing, that in addition to the marginal increase in the velocities, we also incorporated his stretch of property into setting that maximum profile, and we're making sure that that maximum profile is below the eroded area in that channel, which that erosion has occurred over the better part of the last 100 years there, and we will not be surcharging that area to put the water up higher than that kind of stabilized channel. So I think that covered the list of things I noted. Unless there are questions, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Shockley for a few comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just cover a couple questions that I wrote down. I think the first question I sort of alluded to in my previous response. The lid is a political subdivision. To dissolve a lid is a very challenging process. It's created by a county. It's a separate political subdivision, has many of the same powers that a city does, and that it can collect a levy for maintenance, and it can also impose special assessments pursuant to Chapter 429 of the Minnesota statutes, which enables it to undertake projects like this. The process would require a public hearing. It requires approval of the county commission that created it, and then generally as part of the DNR permits, they require that you maintain and operate the system in perpetuity unless the system, the outlet system, is no longer in operation. The second question, I think, was a question regarding what about liability of the lid? Well, like any political subdivision, like the county, the lid has insurance to mitigate that risk. As Mr. Dieter indicated, there's always a chance of litigation. Somebody can trip and fall. Somebody can just outright not like the action you as a board take. That's what you have insurance for. The lid similarly has insurance for those types of claims. I think the other questions that came up, just to be clear, under the operating plan and the Minnesota DNR rules, we're only drawing the lake, proposing to draw the lake down to ordinary high water mark. And so that doesn't mean that this is an unlimited pumping project. The intent is that you would bring it down to ordinary high water. If in the future that starts to bounce back up, then the operating plan would permit the pumps to be turned back on, assuming that the triggers for shutting off the pumps aren't met. I think the engineers have projected that the total drawdown of the lake to ordinary high water would be 3 to 4 years. That may be slightly less if you're in a dry cycle. The one thing I did want to note is that while this year we're in a dry cycle, in a year or two we could be back in a wet cycle, and this project is intended to be a permanent solution for that. This is very similar to other projects I've worked on which involve pumps and operating plans. It is a good type of a project for a number of reasons. You as the ditch authority, you have capacity in your channel. If triggers are met where you have to turn the water off, you can turn the water off. It's not like a traditional outlet in which there's no flow, there's no control over the flow coming in from a lateral. This is literally you get to switch the pump off. And that's why looking at the operating plan is so important. The DNR also requires that the water be filtered for invasive species. And so unlike an unregulated outlet, this water is actually being monitored and filtered for invasive species, so you're not spreading it from watershed to watershed. I think one of the questions was along the lines of why does it take so long for this process? And it was sort of alluded to that the lid is like every other political subdivision. We have certain rules that we have to follow, certain procedures, and before we can undertake a project, you need a feasibility report, you need public hearings, you need a vote of the lid membership, and also there's a whole permitting process to go through. We have this permitting process to go through, we have the DNR permitting process to go through, and then you have to go through the public bidding process and get it constructed. So these projects tend to take 2, 3, 4 years, sometimes even longer, just because of all those boxes that we have to check. I think I can speak on behalf of the lid. The intent is always to follow the permit conditions, always to follow and comply with those, but it's not just trust us, it's also, I think as Ronald Reagan always said, and I like to say this, It's trust but verify. There are verifications built in to the permitting process so that you as a drainage authority know that we're following the rules, but if we're not, you have the ability to say, nope, you can't pump anymore, and DNR also has that. So there's built-in protections for the public at large to the DNR and also the Todd County. I can certainly answer any questions that you have. In the interest of time, I don't want to go on with a long presentation. I'd rather answer questions. I think that Mike and I could answer whatever questions that you have.
I do, Madam Chair. You say that the LID is a political subdivision, and they develop their own budget, but the budget is approved through Morrison County and not Todd County. So what does Todd County have to say about any of their finances over there? Let's say the LID wanted to just say, okay, this is our small budget we want to propose to the board, and they do, which doesn't cover a lot of the expenses on our side. We have nothing to say about what they budget for issues that could be happening down the road.
So, two-part answer to your question. You are correct that the process requires them to propose a budget and go to the Morrison County Commission. I think going back to what Mr. Dieter said, as part of a permit condition, you can include the requirement that the applicant will fund the maintenance, make sure it has sufficient funding to operate the outlet project and to perform the monitoring. That's pretty typical with a permit requirement. And that would be a requirement of the permit, and if we're not fulfilling our obligations of the permit, you as a ditch authority could say you can't pump anymore. So you have the ultimate control. While you don't have control over the BLID's budgeting process, you do have control over the permit.
Madam Chair, I got a question for Mr. Dieters. Can this, we as the ditch authority, place a bond on this, require a bond? To protect our citizens of Todd County?
I'd have to think that through, what type of bond you'd be talking about and whether a bonding company, I'm not sure what we'd be bonding for.
I'm just saying, can we require a bond from the LID to cover any damages in the future, because we don't know what the hell's going on or what's gonna happen? Can we require that bond? And that follows up on Commissioner Kircher's. It's like, okay, Morrison County's taxing the LID. Okay,
Your
they're
remedy-
supplying the LID with the funding.
Right.
We're sitting over here going, hey.
Your remedy, though, would be to shut off the pump, and then you're no worse off. You have a better remedy than a bond. If they don't comply with their permit requirements, the pump's shut off permanently. So,
Do we have that authority?
Yes.
absolutely, if they're out of compliance with their permit, the drainage authority will shut this off.
Okay, what if they're in compliance, but there's a problem downstream?
Then they're out of compliance.
Well, you have to trust your engineer. Again, that's your decision, but if you would decide that, you'd have to say, we believe our engineering analysis is different than the engineers. You'd have to have a basis to decide that.
Madam
so.
Chair, if I may,
Yes.
I think Commissioner Newman is referring not to a bonding, like going out to get bonded. I think he's referring to, can Todd County, as the ditch authority, put a condition on there that says the LID is responsible for any residual cleanup, clean out, anything that we would endure to our ditch system, and after the fact? That's, I think, what you're trying to ask, Mr. Newman?
Again, because we're allowing them an outlet into our ditch system,
Right,
okay?
right.
So,
I understand what you're saying, Commissioner. So, some type of,
Well, you want insurance is what you really.
yeah,
exactly, thank you.
yeah.
And then, Madam Chair.
Well, you can put any condition you want. Whether the court would say that's a reasonable condition, I don't know. So I'm ducking your question because I don't know what type of guarantee you would want as a condition, so.
Well, I have one other question,
Yep.
Madam Chair. I think I heard you say there's a 12-hour period from the time you shut it on to the maximum flow downstream, am I right? Down,
Not the maximum flow, just the water, when the pump is turned on, that water, so if you had a rubber duck, and you put that in the pump,
it'll take 12 hours.
it would take about 12 hours.
Okay, let's say we shut it off, how long does it take for that end effect to take effect down 12 hours?
Right, it'd be very similar, yep.
So we'd almost have to be thinking ahead a little bit to say, okay, we're having some issues, it's gonna take 12 hours to get this all stopped if we're down at the end, to say this is where our problem is, it's gonna take 12 hours before we can actually realize and get it stopped.
Right,
that
for the
correct?
water to be back to its
Back to
natural
this-
state or
yeah,
natural
okay.
watershed, yep.
Where are the, if I can ask, where are the 3 triggering locations? Along the ditch someplace?
Yep, they're the public crossings of
I mean, the
roads.
board probably knows where these 3 locations are, I don't know. So any one of those 3 locations, if it triggers, shuts off the pump.
Correct.
So it doesn't answer your entire 12 hours, but it covers
Kinda makes
a
a little more
fair
sense.
amount of that.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
we have a question, oh, go ahead.
I got one more question. So, but that goes back to my question about checking the alarms, okay? It could be 10 hours, it could be 8 hours, it could be whatever. So, you know, again, without an electronic alarm on there, how the hell do you know?
And if the board decides as a condition you want electric, what'd you call them, electric gauges or whatever, that's something that I put in the order and,
Okay.
I mean, I don't build these systems, so I don't know what that means to say electric alarms, but,
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Oh, okay. Tom Schuler again. I noticed in your capacity report on the ditch, this is to Houston, you had several different cross-section areas as you go down this ditch 41. And what you concluded was that a 0.2 foot rise in the creek, or in ditch 41, was equivalent to 10 CFS of water. Well, you had, is that an average for the system? Or are all of is the whole cross-section of the whole ditch the same? So that you can get that 0.2 foot difference, capacity difference. That's what your argument was. Secondly, there are 3 components to the triggers here. One is the condition of the stream. The second one is the 10 CFS. The third one is if we had a 2-inch rain, Todd County had a 2-inch rain on ditch 41, what's the impact of that? Is it 0.2 feet? Is it whatever? What is it? And I think that needs to be in the equation somewhere. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to pump if we have a drizzle or a heavy fog.
So, Madam Chair, I'll try to address a couple of the items that have been brought up. So, in terms of the 0.2 of a foot rise, or as Bill presented earlier tonight, it was 0.14 feet, which is about 2 inches. So that is the maximum depth increase that 10 CFS creates when we're at the maximum operating profile. Then we addressed some of these questions that have been brought up about electronic monitoring and getting the water through there in 12 hours. That's reflected in the frequency of the monitoring. So, for example, this summer when the water's been very low, if we were running 10 CFS in there, that increase there is not going to bring the ditch anywhere close to the maximum operating plan. And there's less risk that if we did get a rainfall, it's going to result in a water level that exceeds the triggers. But we also included language in there that anytime we get a 1-inch rainfall, the lid would automatically start to monitor daily. and can potentially longer if we find that the water levels are elevated due to that rainfall. So we're addressing the potential risks that the pump would cause the water levels to exceed the maximum operating profile, and that risk changes as the ditch is already high due to natural flows. But if it's low, like it has been this summer, we're at very little risk that a large rainfall plus the pump is going to exceed that level. So that's how we're addressing that 12 hours. If it's that close, they're going to be monitoring it very frequently, and they're likely going to turn the pump off because they don't want to take the risk of violating their permit and losing that. So I think I addressed that question, and I hope I addressed Mr. Schuler's question with that as well.
Madam Chair, I have another question. A lot of talk about ditch 41. Just out of curiosity, if you ran those pumps 24 hours a day, how long it'll take to drop Chaminade 2 feet with a 16-inch smoothbore pipe?
With a 16-inch under pressure or under gravity?
No, you're running the pumps 24
Okay.
hours a day.
With the pumps, okay.
With the pumps.
Yeah. So
drop her 2 feet.
yeah, I'd have to sit and do some sketching on that. So what I can tell you is the analysis that was done when the board considered the size of the system was
Because nobody's really addressed how many days you're gonna be running those pumps. Of course, it is based on the rainfall.
Yep.
But still, to drop that lake 2 feet, if you're gonna run it for 2 weeks and it'll drop it 2 feet? I don't know.
So, Commissioner Newman, when going back a year, when the lid was in the feasibility stage, they asked us to look into sizing of the system, okay? So again, that's not relevant to the capacity of the ditch, but it is tied together. So what we did was we looked at rainfall, we looked at average evaporation rates, and we looked at potential contributions from groundwater inflows. And then we had to make some assumptions on how frequently we thought we'd be able to run the pumps. So the assumption that was made there was that they would hope to be able to operate 9 months a year, with the other 3 months accounting for maintenance and for restrictions due to the operating plan. And so at that time, the lake was closer to 3 feet over the ordinary high water mark. With all of those assumptions factored in, that's where this 3 to 4 year pumping period comes about. So at this point, if the lake is a little lower, you could adjust accordingly. But that's how the calculations
It's
are
not
made.
the size of Lake Osakis, so it's a smaller lake. You should have had an idea, you're the engineer, if you did a bath model or whatever, of how long it's gonna take to drop that lake 2 feet.
Right. So again, Mr. Newman, we did look at it, and at the time we based it off of 3 feet approximately of depth.
Okay.
And the assumption was it would be 3 to 4 years.
Because then we can go back to our constituents in Todd County on ditch 41 and say, hey, these guys think they can drop that lake down 2 feet in a month. I don't know that.
No, but they're limited by the 10 CFS or the triggering. I mean, they don't have the ability to just turn on the pump and let it go, if I'm following your question. The reason it's taking 3 years is because they had to limit so that it wouldn't adversely impact. Sounds like I'm there, I'm not, but.
I don't get, it's.
I mean, you're not advocating, let's run it full bore for a month and get this over with.
Well, if that's what I was thinking, that's what you guys were gonna do.
Ditch 41 people wouldn't stand for that, and we wouldn't meet the
If it's only
statute.
gonna raise it 2 inches, so
No,
you're
that's
running
that-
it through a 16-inch smooth bore pipe, okay?
Well, maybe I can,
Yeah, this should be a petitioner's question, but I'm confused, Commissioner. I want to answer your question, I'm just confused.
I'm confused too.
There was a couple of assumptions built into the engineer's model, that they cannot run the pump 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And so they assumed when they made their calculation that you could run 9 months out of every year, 24 hours a day for all those days. If you could run 9 months every year, The assumption was you would drop 3 feet in the lake in about 3 to 4 years. So,
So it's about a foot every 9 months,
yeah.
right?
If you're using a rough estimate, it'd be about a foot in 9 months.
But if they get 3 years of the trigger kicking in, I mean, we go into monsoons for 3 years, they'll never run their pump. They can't.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the risk they're running. They know that.
And in fact, in the other project they work with, there's been several months that they can't run the outlet. That project, it was estimated to take about 3 years to draw that lake down, and I think they did it in about 2.5. So it was pretty close to what the engineer estimated. And the 10 CFS, it's engineers could build a larger pump or they could build a smaller pump. It's a basis of cost and risk, and looking at the overall feasibility, 10 CFS was selected. And so you could draw it down faster if you had bigger pumps, or you could draw it down slower if you had smaller pumps.
But if you used too big a pump, they couldn't meet the capacity issue.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should recess this now before we continue to go on. Oh,
Well-
there's a question right behind you.
I have a question on the Bolton and Yank report, table 2.
Yeah, go to the podium.
Jerry, if you'd like to.
Jerry Braver, property on the old Fish Trap Creek. I would like to refer to table 2 of the Bolton and Mink report. Question is on your laterals. You show that laterals 5 through 9 drains to the old Fish Trap Creek, but you don't have any data showing what the distance would be up Old Fish Trap Creek, what effect it would have.
We had enough data for that, didn't we? We did not have enough data to look at those 4 laterals, lateral 5 through 9.
That's a natural stream. I would think it would be
Through Fish Trap Creek.
That's a natural stream, is that correct?
Yep.
I would think that would be important data to get. See what effect would have on a natural stream.
By keeping the water in the channel. So that's what we looked at as far as the exact data up the lateral 5 and 9. We didn't have enough survey information for that, but that's the information that we did have. We recommended that lowering of those triggers 0.2 feet to be on the conservative side of it, like Mike talked about. So we're with that information and the data we have, we would be within the channels of the open ditch system.
I would think anytime you would impact a natural stream, that data would be obtained, even to the interest of the DNR, not only the landowners. So I would ask that information be obtained. Thank you.
Yeah, so we had talked about the culvert to 311, so we talked about the inlet side of that. We're below that, so we're not including water on the inlet side of it, but I think he's referring to the outlet side of it as far as backing water up the channel from the back side of it by a restriction of flow. We had talked, I think, a little bit about elevation difference in that location, but again, the model doesn't go up there, so we couldn't review that portion of it. So. I'm unable to address the question. I don't know if Mike can answer that any more clear.
Well, I'll just reiterate what we talked about in regards to Mr. Kubitz's question. So Jerry had reached out to me earlier, and we did look at that. So again, the low area on Jerry's property appears to be at approximately elevation 1250. And then if we adjust that for the datum conversion to get to the same datum we're using for the model, where the old creek, that old loop, connects back into the main ditch near Alan Trout's property. If you look at the map that we referred to earlier, the maximum operating profile at that elevation is down at 1244. So we're at least 5 feet below Mr. Brever's property, which is over a mile away. Again, as Bill pointed out, we're focused on making sure the water is within the channel, and the maximum impact anywhere in the system would be that 0.14 feet or about 2 inches. So that would be the maximum impact that Jerry would see, and we believe it would be confined within the channel, which again is over the overbank. His floodplain area is 5 feet higher than our maximum operating profile.
Any other questions? Then, members of the board, if you don't mind me talking about what the next step is or within the process. There's basically 2 steps in this process. The first part we've been talking about is whether to grant the outlet or not, and then if any conditions. So as to that issue, we've had all the public comment. We would be closing the public comment as to that issue. If the board decides not to grant the outlet, then we don't even get into the outlet fee issue. If the board grants the outlet with conditions, then we would likely be asking for a recommendation from a viewer such as Brian Murphy. There's several I could indicate that would make a recommendation, and we would decide that. So, but the outlet question is the big question. So if we close the public input portion, it comes back to the board now for you to have a discussion on whether to grant the outlet or not, and if you do, what conditions you'd like to see on it. So we'd need a motion to close the public input portion just as to the outlet issue, not the outlet fee issues.
Is there a motion to close the public input for the, what did you say, Kurt?
For the outlet issue.
For the outlet issue.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Motion by Commissioner Kircher. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kneisel. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And it carries. So the
And the
public
next
comment.
question, I'm just going to read again. At the hearing, the Drainage Authority shall consider the capacity of the outlet drainage system. If express authority is given to use the drainage system as an outlet, the Drainage Authority shall state by order the terms and conditions for use of the drainage system as an outlet. So your decision now, if you look at the statute at number 10, it would be either to approve the outlet with conditions, deny the outlet, or continue the hearing if you believe we needed more information, which is your decision, but it seems like we've had, well, I should keep my mouth shut. It seems like we've had a lot of information provided, so nothing jumped out at me that maybe you would need more information, but so those are the options you have, and my only issue is we make sure we decided, whatever you decide, it's based on the statute so I can defend it. But you may want to have some discussion or whatever you're doing to make your decision. But so the people in the public know we've closed the public input. Now it's the board's time to talk
Commissioners?
about it and decide.
I guess my input to that would be, we've heard a lot of information tonight, a lot of new information tonight. Heard a lot of reports on very new things, and seen a version 6 operating plan appear really fast. and have listened to opinions on it, but I haven't had a chance to review it myself at all. I would really like to see a continuation of the hearing. And a question in regards to that, we just start where we're at, correct? I mean, we don't have to go back and start all over again.
If you do D, or where was it, where we just continued it, yeah, we wouldn't reopen things.
We just come back to the point of
It's a chance for the board to discuss and make their decision.
Right.
We would pick a specific time and date tonight so that we don't have to renotice everything, and so that people know, only people that'll be discussing it, if you do that, will be your board after review of this information you heard tonight. So, and I would, in fairness to everybody, including opponents or petitioners, that if you decide to do that, we set the date pretty quickly. I mean, because there isn't a whole, you just need time to review everything, and
I think
there's a lot of-
another consideration in that is to go right into a discussion if we would approve to do conditions. It's hard to just sit here and go, okay, this should be in there, or this should be in there. It'd be really nice to be able to sit back and look at it and go, okay, what do we
when
really
you
gotta
come back
consider?
to say, if you would prove it, but I'd want these conditions, even if I considered approval.
Yeah, but to just pop those off right
Right,
now.
I agree with you, because you're gonna be looking to me, what conditions would you like, Kurt, and even I'd have to, I know some of them, but you may wanna, if you decide to do that, so.
Is that a motion?
Oh, let's look at a date.
I can make that a motion. Do we need it as a motion?
Yes, but we need a specific time and date and location, otherwise we have to renotice.
Prior to the motion.
Well, as part of the motion, to continue it for a decision till,
Yep.
and I don't know what date you're looking at.
Just for clarification, just when you say continue hearing, that's the petition hearing, that's not the public hearing portion.
Right.
Okay.
It's
Correct.
just to
That-
give the
that was
board.
my question, is that
I
we're
think
not
we want to make it
starting.
real clear so the people don't think they can come back. The only people that'll be talking generally, I always talk, but the board will be the one doing the discussion whenever we do
Well,
this.
if we come back, Madam Chair, our only options are A, B, and C, am I correct?
Correct.
Yep.
We'll be taking off from the agenda where we're leaving off tonight.
Yep.
So if we look, I don't know what
Have a-
you're
I was
looking at.
thinking the 14th, which gives us about 2 weeks to read things and look at all this material we've gotten and
I can,
review our-
if you do it at 6 o'clock that night, I can do 6 o'clock
yeah, that's
that night.
fine.
I can't do during the day because I have other hearings.
Oh, 6 o'clock is fine.
So if somebody would want to make a motion to continue,
Fourteenth is good for me.
Conflicts?
14th, September 14th.
September.
Yep,
that
couple
work for
weeks.
everybody?
It works for
Yeah,
me.
that'll
Yep,
work.
You're good.
6 o'clock?
So the motion would be to continue the board decision-making discussion until September 14th at 6 PM at this location.
September 14th,
And
6 p.m.
Rod, did you put that in the form of a motion?
I will, yep.
Okay.
So my motion would be to continue the hearing on September 14th at 6 PM at this location.
For the limited discussion and decision by the board on the outlet issue.
Correct.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Newman. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
That carries. And so with that,
And so
we
the
will,
people that are either listening or here, you're not gonna get another notice, so if this is important, September 14th, you can come and listen to the board discussion and whatever they decide, so.
with that, I'll be recessing the public hearing for the outlet of ditch 41. Recording